It has long been commonplace. And his hands are stained with nothing but his own blood. 6 years ago, on the day he was born, his mother passed away, and his father was fighting alongside his best friend to eliminate the moon demon, who intended to slaughter the martial arts world. Although they became legends in the martial arts world at that time, it was only when his father returned that he showed his genuine and deep love for his wife. That left him unable to let go. He locked himself in his wife's room for 6 whole years. Although his aunt was the rightful wife of Mei Yen, she exhausted all means to help him emerge from the shadows. At this point, Su-er became the source of his resentment. As a result, he lived almost like an animal, for 6 years, only able to eat. At this moment, the servant brought news. It is said that the head of the Nangong family has arrived outside the residence, and the master, who hasn't left the house for 6 years, is out there to greet him. This news made the lady's expression turn particularly grim. In her view, no matter how much she does, it pales in comparison to what a brother of the master could achieve. After 6 years, he is visiting. Thinking of this, she looked at Su-er with an even colder glare. She sternly asked him if he knew what he should do. The child on the ground coughed up blood, and crawled to his feet. He indicated that he would keep his distance. He definitely wouldn't let his dirty appearance be seen by the guests. He wouldn't bring shame to the sword god Lu Jia. Looking at the boy, who seemed somewhat sensible, the old lady stared for a long time without understanding his intentions. She casually tossed aside the towel used to wipe the blood. Make him clean up quickly. Hurry up and get out, while Aunt Bai Eugen's eldest son looks at his half-brother with complicated feelings. His mother indeed feels very constrained because of him, and this brother has also lost his mother. He really doesn't know how to judge right from wrong. He has shown an unusual calmness and numbness from an early age. Facing the visit from the Nangong family, known for their swordsmanship, his mother insisted that he must be polite, friendly, and warm. He also understood that this was his mother's hope to use him to unite the two families through marriage. However, he felt he had no choice in the matter. His father did not pass down the Jyotian sword technique. So no matter how high the status, he was just a scion of a noble family. The young master had no choice but to obey his mother's arrangements like that foolish younger brother. He brought Bai Eugen. He took the 3 siblings outside the residence. Although the master looked as withered as a dry twig, he showed a long-lost cheer in front of his life-and-death brother. After the two families exchanged pleasantries, they learned that the Nangong family had a 7-year-old girl visiting this time. She just couldn't stand the tedious journey. As soon as they arrived outside the residence, she ran off to explore on her own. At this moment, Su-er was following the usual demands of the elder. He stood alone by the wall, enduring punishment. He could no longer remember how many times this had happened. All he felt was exhaustion, hunger, and weariness. But he was only 6 years old. He truly did not dare to resist the oppressive might of Bai Eugen. He endured painfully. Zhong had lost her last bit of strength, falling to the ground. Before long, he heard footsteps approaching. He kept urging himself to move. If the old lady finds out, he is afraid. But at this moment, the person had already arrived in front of him. He struggled to open his eyes. He could no longer see who the figure was. But a strong fear gave him the strength to kneel up again. He hoarsely shouted, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I lack." But he hadn't finished speaking. As he gradually regained his social composure, he suddenly realized the newcomer was a girl who seemed to be around his age. In his eyes, the girl was as exquisite as a fairy. He was entranced for a long time. Living in fear and despair, Su-er Zhong began to cry. This scene left the usually calm and composed Nangong Yi at a loss. But he didn't realize how much impact his appearance had on the little one. His originally ethereal and distant demeanor seemed to her like a celestial being about to enact divine punishment. Recalling the Nangong family's visit to Wulong Villa, he knew this girl he had never seen before must be the esteemed guest mentioned by his aunt. If his aunt knew he had interacted with someone from the Nangong family, thinking of this, he felt a tightness in his heart. He took a deep breath. Suddenly, he wanted to escape. But this situation left Xiao Yi feeling confused. With a light leap, she grabbed Su-er by the collar and slammed him to the ground, revealing the astonishing scars on his small body at such a young age. And from the boy's parched lips, the sound of apologies kept coming. The setting sun cast a glow over the two of them, making Xiaoyi fall silent for a long time. He didn't know what the boy had been through, but a wave of frustration surged in his heart. He crouched down. He planned to clear the dust off the boy, but that earlier motion had left him completely powerless. Xiao Ye's actions only made him more terrified. He recalled various past events. The apologies spilling from his lips wouldn't stop, but he never imagined that the other person was just placing a hand on his head. The voice rang in his ears like silver bells. "What is your name?" After getting Su Er's response, he gently comforted the boy again. "Don't be afraid, I will protect you." What Xiaoyi didn't know was that this kind of pure care was warmth Su Er had never felt since birth. The warmth lasted only a moment. After 6 years of grievances, he could no longer hold back. It made him cry like a child. Seeing this pitiful child, Nan Gongyi sighed softly. He embraced him, as if responding to all his apologies, muttering that it was all okay. The two small figures stood together for a long time, until Su Er could cry no more. The rumbling in his stomach made Xiaoya stand up. She got up. She indicated that Su Er should follow him, she would take him to eat something delicious. Their two small figures arrived at a dog hole. Watching Xiaoya go straight through, Su Er seemed even more frightened. In a moment of distraction, Xiaoya's hand reached out from the hole. On the other side, the two current sword gods were drinking heavily in the hall with their wives. The ladies then learned that when the moon demon mastered its power, it had already surpassed the limits of mortals. Eldest brother Nangong, who was consuming his battle strength alone. In a moment of crisis, my dear brother Lu Murong arrived. His 9-day sword technique was nearly frenzied in its strike. Though he defeated the moon demon, he also left behind a lingering ailment. Before dying, the moon demon shattered into 9 streams of sword energy, scattering throughout the martial world. But at that moment, Bai Yujin suddenly proposed that he wanted to send his eldest son to learn from him. This left Nangong particularly surprised. In his view, the Jyotian swordsmanship of the Lu family is not inferior to the martial arts of the Nangong family. As for learning from a master, that seems a bit far-fetched. He looked at his longtime friend Lu Murong. I didn't expect his request to be even more exaggerated. He actually hoped that his children could trouble the elder brother to look after them. And there were some confidential matters that would only be convenient to disclose when the two were alone. But before this life and death brother could agree to the request, Lu Murong suddenly started coughing violently. He collapsed onto the table. This scene startled Nangong. I immediately need to go check the situation in the other place. But why has Su Er's father ignored him for the past 6 years? And why is he unwilling to pass down the 9 heavens sword technique? In his final moments, the father revealed his true feelings to his sworn brother. On the day Ning Er left, my soul went with him. And he left behind a child who looks just like me. But I really don't have the courage to face him. Although I know that Ning Er's death isn't that child's fault, I still feel like I will hate him. For 6 years, I have never dared to visit him. Once, Nangong looked at this younger brother, who had once been so spirited. He could never have imagined that after the battle with the moon demon, his injuries would be this severe. To put it more seriously, this situation really is unacceptable. A legendary figure in the martial arts world is actually the most incompetent father. But looking at his current state, I can't really blame him. I feel a mix of emotions. All I can say is to get better quickly, for the sake of your soldiers and your child. But how could they know that Bai Yujin was consumed by jealousy? For all these years, she has mistreated that child. And it was this young lady of the Nangong family who discovered it all. Xiaoyi sees too much suffering in the young man. As a daughter of privilege, she has been exceptional since childhood. Her skills improved rapidly. It was a remarkable transformation. But for the first time, I felt helpless in front of Su Er. Although I secretly helped her escape from Wulong Villa, I could only buy her some good food. And although Su Er was a young master from a prestigious family, it was her first time tasting hot skewers. For him, this taste has already etched itself in his mind. He won't forget. It was like a dream, following Xiaoyi through the market, tasting many dishes he had never tried before. But in dreams, one wakes up. The guards of the villa also found them. By the time they returned to the villa, it was already late at night. Both mothers looked extremely worried about the two children. But when Byujin showed her heartfelt concern for Su'er, the uncontrollable trembling in her body was clearly felt by Nan Gongyi, who was holding her hand. In an instant, Xiao Yi seemed to understand everything. A pure and intense hostility emanated from him. He fixed his gaze on her. This scene made Byujin's heart skip a beat. Just as he was about to ask something in confusion, Xiao Yi and Su'er also arrived with their big brothers. From a distance, the anxious voice of Nangong's big brother could be heard. "What are you doing? I've been looking everywhere for you. I thought you went back to climbing the roof." As they got closer, Su'er's big brother also saw Nan Gongyi, exquisite, pure, and aloof. But after all, he is still a child. He couldn't describe the sudden panic he felt. Spring goes, autumn comes. In the same year's frost month, the generation sword god, Lu Murong, never woke from his dreams again, and Byujin summoned 20 death attendants from the Bai family. Each was to protect Wulong Villa. At the same time, he sent his eldest son Lu Yuan to the Nangong family. He apprenticed under Nangong who. From this point on, Byujin completely took control of Wulong Villa. He solidified the Lu family's status. However, when he searched through the late master's belongings, he couldn't find the manual for the Nine Heavens sword technique. This made him extremely furious. He couldn't obtain the sword manual. There's still attention from the Nangong family. He can never feel at ease. In a fit of anger, the head of the Lu family ordered the dead servants to throw everything related to the old man into storage. He even reminded everyone, including that brat. And Su'er's fate was once again manipulated. He ended up living in the Lu family's storage. Each day, he survived on a hard bun and a bowl of murky water. That day, he continued to gaze at the bun in his hand, which was as hard as a rock. He reminisced about the incredible flavors that Xiaoye had introduced him to that day. Suddenly, he noticed something sparkling in the corner of the warehouse. Driven by curiosity, he discovered a dusty mirror there. Although he didn't expect that Auntie wouldn't leave such a thing for him, he didn't think too much about it. He rolled up his sleeves and decided to clean this rare item. The more he rubbed, the more he felt something was off. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror smiled at him with a serene expression. This was a sinister mirror that bullied children. It had a very wise name, Nine Heavens Mystical Maiden, and winter had arrived. The little one had been locked in the warehouse for over 6 months. The food delivered every day was getting less and less. The guards were calculating when they could collect the remains of this once young master. At this moment, Su'er is indeed gradually losing consciousness. The drafty warehouse and his thin clothing, combined with his nearly starving body, leave him with no energy to fear this strange thing. Although he was indeed startled when he first saw it, he realizes that no matter how frightening his reflection is, he cannot walk out of it, and thus, he is no longer as terrified as before. Looking at the little one curled up in the corner, Su'er in the mirror remained silent for a long time. Zhong sighed softly. He picked up a wooden stick nearby and began to dance around in front of him. Su'er was drawn to this scene. He looked up. He felt that the movements were quite strange. Like a startled swan. Like a swimming dragon. Causing his gaze to be deeply fixed on the figure in the mirror. Yet the more he looked, the more alarmed he became. His movements were almost identical to the Nine Heavens sword technique his elder brother practiced. Only his dance was even more marvelous. Unable to resist, he picked up a stick and started to learn from him. When he realized the little guy had almost no martial arts foundation, the person in the mirror revealed an unhidden disdain in his eyes. Once the golden rooster stood alone, it never moved again. As expected, Su'er couldn't maintain his balance. He fell face first to the ground. This made him smile with satisfaction. Although the little guy was angry, he could sense that he was following the other's movements. He gradually felt himself emerging from the cold state. In less than a day of rest and grazing, the little guy felt a very comfortable aura twisting within him. At that moment, Su'er still didn't realize that this aura was true energy. It was accumulated by powerful experts over time through internal cultivation. But this scene infuriated the person in the mirror. To him, what was this about? He had personally trained for nearly 10 days. With just this much, he has nearly completed the surge of true energy. Though separated by a mirror, he cannot feel the real sense of pressure. Yet the self-generated momentum is still deeply shocking to Suer. But for the little one, being able to successfully dispel the cold of winter is already enough. Although he feels the actions of the person in the mirror are incredibly cool, he has no desire to continue practicing. Gradually, the sword moves he executes become increasingly profound. He really couldn't hold back and picked up the stick to learn from him. But this time, the difficulty was quite high. Suer spent several days without being able to master it. One move at a time. Plus, the darkly scheming figure in the mirror mocked the little guy in various ways. The sergeant found that he didn't really have a compelling reason to learn, and the things he was learning were getting increasingly difficult. The physical exertion was becoming greater and greater. The more he practiced, the hungrier he became. Still unsatisfied, he planned to cover up the strange mirror once more. But the figure in the mirror seemed to have something to say to him. With no choice, he lifted the cover again. This glance left the little guy frozen in place. The dense text in the letter and the striking Nine Heavens sword seemed to come alive and drilled into his mind. Thus, even his father had never obtained the Nine Heavens sword technique. The entire text was imprinted in the mind of this 6-year-old boy. A child who was originally destined to die in this warehouse has had their fate completely changed. Time flies. In an almost entirely closed-off and undisturbed environment, 10 years have passed in the blink of an eye. At 16, Suer finally lets out a sigh of relief. Finally, I am just like you. Identical. The young man returns to the world after 10 years. Though he is already a peerless sword master, he appears particularly lost. Because he has spent every day with the reflection in the mirror, he has not completely lost his ability to speak. Yet his experiences are still that of a 6-year-old. And when he finally masters the last move of the Nine Heavens sword technique, the reflection in the mirror appears particularly joyous. But it also becomes increasingly illusory. Pointing to the dome of the warehouse, he indicated that Suer could now leave. Gazing at the sunlight he hadn't seen in 10 years, he pondered for a long time. Before he knew it, he had jumped onto the clutter in the room. Watching him slowly climb onto the roof, the person in the mirror knew. It was time to part ways with this little guy. His body gradually disappeared in the mirror. In his place was a faceless figure. It seemed to be praying for the boy in the mirror. When Suer regained his senses, he turned to look back. He had intended to share his joy with the only friend he had for the past 10 years. But the mirror was already empty. It was as if that guy had never existed at all. Although he understood this was his farewell to himself, complex emotions surged within him. Looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar city of Luoyang from the rooftop, it seemed he had finally made up his mind. Slowly, he stood up, his body no longer weak. The next day, Lu Yuan, who had been training at the Nangong family for 10 years, returned to Wulong Villa. The Nangong siblings came along due to their family connections. At this time, Suer's older brother appeared exceptionally outstanding. Bai Yujin had devoted himself to his work over the past 10 years. This allowed Wulong Villa to maintain its former prestige. Meanwhile, the villa no longer held a single site. After a long separation, they seemed especially joyful. After some casual greetings, Bai Yujin did not forget to compliment the young master of the Nangong family. I heard that Qing Tian's nephew is now a well-known swordsman in the Jianghu. He looked toward the woman beside him. His admiration was even more unreserved. For a moment, it seemed everyone was harmonious and friendly. But among them, it did not include Xiao Yan. Now he had grown more exquisite and delicate. But since he came here, he has been searching for that frail figure from 10 years ago. Even when facing Bai Yujin's greetings, he appeared to be deaf to them. Although the older brother scolded the younger sister for her lack of manners, he simply walked straight towards the inner courtyard alone. This scene left everyone puzzled. But what kind of skills does Bai Yujin possess? Though he appeared kind on the surface, he understood the girl's intentions well. Taking advantage of everyone entering the residence, he immediately instructed the guards that under no circumstances should anyone from the Nangong family approach the warehouse. If they discovered that little bastard was being held, he feared that the long feudal Nangong who would be the first to take his life. However, the guard's panic made him uneasy. Upon learning that the little brat escaped from the warehouse last night, He was furious. With no time to return home to entertain the Nangong family, he brought his men to the warehouse. He angrily smashed open the door. What greeted his eyes was a scene of chaos. He quickly noticed the damage to the roof. Even though last night's thunderstorm caused it, he couldn't figure it out. But the little brat doesn't know any martial arts. How did he manage to climb up? Seeing this scene, the squad leader quickly said he would personally lead the pursuit. However, Bai Yujin unexpectedly did not object. In his opinion, this might be for the best. A little waist stuck in a 6-year-old mentality. Now he's just a little bigger. Don't know how to survive. Soon you will suffer from hunger and sickness. Then just wait for him to lay his corpse in the wilderness. Everything is fine. Girl ice muscle jade bone. But he has a keen eye for reading human nature. Although he has been looking at the golden branch since he was a child. But because of my encounter with Suer 10 years ago, the boy's small frame was covered with shocking scars. I inexplicably felt a deep sadness. I couldn't imagine how, being fellow descendants of prominent families, he could have suffered such a fate. It wasn't until Yuan asked his mother about Suer that he finally sensed something was terribly wrong. Standing behind the two, completely gloomy, yet remaining silent. At this moment, Bai Yujin, though the master of the manor, is deeply wary of the Nangong family. With a smiling explanation, she tries to obscure the truth, but the bedding and furniture in Suer's room all appear as new. This leaves Xiaoye completely unconvinced by her words. Turning to leave, seeing that this little Bai doesn't take me seriously at all. An old sense of frustration and shame surged within me. But the person beside me, Yuan, is no fool. He knows what my mother does to the younger brother. He also understands just how formidable this younger sister is compared to him. He possesses a title more fitting than that of the elder brother. His thoughts are remarkably intricate. There is no possibility of deceiving him at all. Thinking of this, Yuan's heart tightened. He worried that his mother might have harmed his younger brother. For him, he didn't have many feelings for this half-brother. But if his admired senior sister found out, he feared it would be too late. Bai Yu informed Yuan of the specific situation simply. After learning that Suer had been held in the old warehouse, Zhong was worried. He rushed over. What surprised him was that his senior sister had already arrived here. After sensing Yuan's aura, Xiao Yi finally spoke up. Although this is the most secluded place in Wulong Villa, there are many guards. Is there something I shouldn't see? Seeing this, I have roughly understood his attitude. I will set off with my brother to report to father immediately. And the relationship between the Nangong family and the Lu family should no longer exist. Take care, junior brother. Listening to the fading voice of senior sister, Yuan felt especially complicated inside. He had been very happy in the Nangong family for the past 10 years. There were no intrigues like those in the Lu family. He truly did not want to sever ties with his master and senior sister. At this moment, Suer was walking down the streets that Xiaoye once took her through. Looking at how different it was from her memories, he finally realized that he seemed to have stayed in the warehouse too long. As Zheng was lost in thought, he accidentally bumped into an older man. He hurriedly apologized to him, but when he saw the man's face, he realized this was the swordsman who had personally sent him into the warehouse. He was instantly frightened and lowered his head. He really didn't want to be caught and taken back. As Zheng was leaving, he was suddenly called by the man. After 10 years, this man only finds the little kid particularly familiar. He thought to ask about his background, but Suer had no idea what he was thinking. Feeling guilty, he ran away. This made the man even more alert. He felt that seeing someone from Wulong Mountain Villa so scared might mean he was in big trouble. It didn't matter whether he wanted to get up or not. He just chased after him. The two were in a hurry, chasing each other. Suer noticed that his opponent's lightness skill was exceptional. He couldn't shake him off no matter what. At that moment, he saw the city gate as night was about to fall. It felt like seeing a glimmer of hope for escape. But the man was hot on his heels. Just as Suer escaped through the city gate, he chased after him. But the heavy iron falling from above made him realize he was chasing too eagerly. Just as he had nowhere to hide, the young man turned around and braced himself against the falling gate. He even apologetically hoped that the man wouldn't catch him. But the uncle was left completely baffled. He realized the other wasn't trying to catch him. I just want to know why he ran away when he saw himself. It was then that Su realized he was just being paranoid. After leaving, the old man still couldn't believe his eyes. Can this city gate really be held by a person? These might be the most principled group of bandits I've ever seen. Though they act like robbers. Yet they only pluck feathers from passing geese. They never truly feel the dew. On the contrary, they are often beaten up by passing merchant caravans. As a result, most of the time they can only survive by scavenging. And this time, the boy they picked up, they seem especially attentive to. But in Su-er's eyes, this group of people looks fierce and menacing. His mind is also in a fog. Who are they? And why is he here? For a boy whose mind is still at the age of 6, his feelings at this moment can only be described as terror. He only remembers fleeing from Luoyang City to the deep mountains, and due to extreme hunger, he mistakenly ate a beautiful mushroom. It has just turned night. He began to feel dizzy. His limbs felt weak. His stomach churned as if it were on fire. But all he could vomit was bile. It was then he realized the mushroom must be toxic. Before long, he lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Though he didn't know how long it had been. He was fortunate that the first to find him was not a wolf or a leopard. In a daze, they couldn't hear clearly what the two were saying. Yet they were even more troubled than Su-er at that moment. Encountering a dead person early in the morning, they cursed their luck. But upon closer inspection, it seemed he was alive. They lamented that they had never seen anyone worse off than themselves. It looked like the little guy was a beggar. No doubt, bringing him back to the village to do odd jobs would be a good deed. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in this wooden cabin. From their mouths, he learned that this was their stronghold, and they were the kings of the 5 Peaks Mountain. They were the free and bold heroes of the forest. They didn't even care whether the little guy understood. They just kept introducing themselves for a long while. Su-er only understood that the 6 of them were sworn brothers and bandits on this mountain. But in their eyes, since the boy was a beggar, giving him some food should make him grateful. Yet the little guy, even though his stomach had been rumbling for a long time, dared not eat the buns they roasted. His reason was that he had nothing to offer. Can't afford this meal. The young man looks foolish. He doesn't seem like someone who can cook. They also started to feel a headache, longing for such small things. Their elder brother, Pang Tianyang, suddenly seemed to have an idea. He grabbed Su-er and dragged him outside. He casually tossed him by the cliff and said nothing, just quietly watching him. From the boy's cowardly behavior, he finally understands what the problem is. The little guy shouldn't be foolish. Rather, he's like those children who grow up abused in the stories. This makes the rough man feel irritated, but his way of handling it is rather brutal. He clearly tells Su-er, joining the bandit group can bring freedom, and you won't go hungry. Or rather, the youth prefers to be a coward who gets robbed. These words struck Su-er's heart directly. He lowered his head and gritted his teeth, shaking his head vigorously. Seeing this, the bandit leader finally revealed a pleased expression. The next step is to give him a good meal. Why are we the masters of Wufeng Mountain? Why is there no one here who can resist us? In short, it's just a blow. Finally, I have to ask the little guy if he thinks they are bad. Although their original intention was just to let Su-er stay and do odd jobs. But only the boy himself knows how precious this kind of encouragement is to me. And Pang Tianyang found that brainwashing was going smoothly. Now all that was left was to shout the slogans loudly. He looked up at the mountain and shouted an incredibly vulgar phrase. Then he added, "We are the best." Finally, he got the little guy to shout it back with him. But such a simple phrase seemed to shatter years of grievances in the boy's heart, cursing like it was nothing learned from others. His shout sent all the birds and beasts scattering across Wufeng Mountain. Although Tianyang was surprised, he didn't think much of it. He only felt that the boy had a strong voice. He was a good candidate for a handyman. If he performed well, he could also teach him some self-defense skills. Thus, Su-er embarked on his new life in this stronghold. I learned a lot of common knowledge that I had never understood before, and how to cook a big pot of rice so that 7 people won't go hungry. It was just that occasionally my brothers would come back from outside all beaten up, which made Su-er very worried. Isn't it ironic that the young master of this noble family felt satisfaction for the first time in his life only after becoming a bandit. But one day, two very imposing figures suddenly appeared. I don't know why. These bold brothers need to kneel and welcome a young man who has been tricked into a den of thieves, yet he seems quite satisfied. And those gathered are just a bunch of ordinary people forced into this. They're not very skilled, but they are fairly sturdy. They call it occupying the mountain as kings. But every time I patrol the mountains, I only collect a toll from the merchant caravans. Even so, I often get bullied by the guards of these caravans. As a result, I'm almost too poor to make ends meet now. In desperation, I sought help from the Dear Spirit Alliance's officials, and rumors say they are the giants of banditry. Just their name is enough to instill fear in people. Ever since the Moon Demon died, the entire martial arts world has been dominated by the Righteous Alliance formed by the 7 major sects and 2 great families. At this time, the members of the Demon sect were unable to find peace or security. At the same time, a monstrous man emerged. He called himself the Blade of Deer Forest. With his own strength, he nearly unified all the bandits. And this one force, the Righteous Alliance, had never succeeded in their repeated campaigns against him. Soon, people began to call him the Demon Lord of Broken Heavens. In the ranking of the martial world, they became the top of the 10 masters. As a result, remnants of the demonic sect came seeking them. They were all absorbed by Lu Ling. This made Lu Ling extraordinarily powerful. Their influence subtly surpassed that of the Righteous Alliance. It is said that bandits who join them can rob without shedding blood. Merchant caravans hearing they are from the Green Forest will obediently hand over large sums of money, in order to avoid retaliation that could lead to extermination. Such a dark fate. The brothers have long admired this. And this time, finally, an officer came to inspect the situation of this small stronghold. Upon discovering they only had 6 strong men and 1 young boy, he seemed particularly disappointed. Although the bandits near Luoyang are particularly tough to handle, so much so that there are hardly any bandits around Wufeng Mountain, and even a formidable figure like Lu Lin wouldn't resort to exterminating a family for a few underlings. That would provoke an all-out war with the Righteous Path Alliance. It would be more trouble than it's worth. But only leaders like them can see through these matters clearly. As the organization grew, performance evaluations began to emerge even back then. The number of strongholds in their hands was extremely limited. What if the boss gets mad? I'm afraid we might lose an arm or a leg. After thinking it over, we have to ask them to quickly gather 10 people, even if they join the Dear Spirit Alliance. It's surprising how easily they can enter the largest force in the current martial arts world. Tianyang hasn't even reacted yet. But their intentions are even more malicious. They know that if it's an ordinary thief, the big merchant convoy will at most just teach them a lesson. But if it's Lu Lin's bandits, they would actually go all out. This is to prevent being discovered by Lu Lin and bringing trouble upon themselves. I expect that in less than 2 months, this little broken stronghold will no longer exist. By then, the authorities will investigate. No one will ever know what scale this village once was. What size of a settlement it was. Everything was decided by whatever the 2 brothers said. When the brothers came to their senses, they only felt that the village paths had widened. That night, they got thoroughly drunk with their brothers. And Schwer, watching his brothers so happy, himself felt unusually cheerful. Thus, the few of them started recruiting new members. He began to patrol the mountains more actively. But he still didn't take Schwer along. During these days here, the young man became increasingly efficient in his work. In his spare time, he would go to the back mountain to practice swordplay. Suer was simple-minded, only hoping that one day he could help his older brothers. Another month passed. Among the brothers, the sergeant found 3 brave souls who came to the mountain for refuge. Some came seeking wealth to support their families. Others were on the run from the law, and there were girls who escaped from being sold to brothels. It seems this village has become a melting pot in the Green Forest. Suddenly, the 4th brother pressed Schwer's head and congratulated the youngest. From now on, he also has younger brothers. In the mountain stronghold, ranking is determined by the length of time one has been there. So from now on, Suer can go patrolling the mountains with them. However, the new arrival, Chongshan, was extremely displeased to hear this. He didn't want to be the little kid's underling. He immediately expressed his desire for a competition, to determine the position of the seventh. Though Tianyang found this amusing, he didn't stop it. He also wanted to see how the little guy had fared after more than half a year in the village. Has he developed any courage at all? But at this moment, Blood is silent. It's hard to tell what he's thinking. He quietly clenches his fists, slowly walks toward the open ground, and confronts Chongshan. At this point, the brothers finally see the fierce battle that has blossomed in the little guy's eyes. What no one knows is how important everything is to Su'er. He is unwilling to let even a single thing be taken away from him. This scene brings great joy to Su'er's brothers. They actually care for the little guy a lot. Over the past 6 months, he has worked hard without complaint. But next, Chongshan threw a punch directly at him. This left a few people feeling their hearts in their throats. But at that moment, Su'er suddenly squatted down. Immediately closing in, he swung his arms. Only then did he realize he had no weapon in hand. Besides practicing with a sword in the warehouse, he had hardly ever tried using his fists. This distorted way of training left his mind in a mess. He didn't know how to respond. So he clenched his fists and struck Chongshan hard in the face. But the other person was a soldier returning from battle. This punch made him extremely angry. He immediately pinned him to the ground. He began to hit him repeatedly. This scene left Tianyang dumbfounded. Just a moment ago, he had such impressive agility. How did I suddenly end up unable to fight back? After a while, even Chongshan was tired from hitting me. Only then did he stop his actions. Gasping for breath, I thought everything should be over. I was about to find Tianyang to ask about Lao Chi's position, when suddenly, a gloomy voice came from behind me. I will never give up that position. Let us stand until the end. The boy is perhaps the only unparalleled master who was beaten into greatness. He was pinned down by the warrior and hammered for an incense stick's worth of time. Yet he rose again from the battle. What he didn't know was that Su'er had lived like a punching bag since he could remember. Though nothing appeared to be damaged on the surface, there wasn't a single good patch of skin on his body. He had finally gained a few days of being cared for. Even birds and beasts understand the principle of guarding their food. How could a young man easily allow others to take from him? Chongshan was already filled with surprise and confusion about this matter. Just now, his fist struck so hard that even a strong man would need to find a doctor for his injuries. Yet, this small figure seemed to have only suffered a little skin injury. Even Su'er himself was unaware of just how much power he now possessed. But he didn't know how to harness the true energy from the 9 heavens in the Xian NV mirror. But he knew how hard it was to obtain everything he had now. Instinctively, he turned his fist into an ice blade, channeling his true energy toward his opponent. Fortunately, he hadn't mastered the technique yet. Otherwise, with that punch, his brothers would probably have to find someone else to join them again. Just in that moment, Chongshan fainted. This scene surprised Su'er as well. But he knew he had won. Meanwhile, his brothers were still in the dark. They couldn't make sense of what had just happened. Each one questioned whether Chongshan had some tricks up his sleeve. Even the 7th brother, while watching, had no reason to knock out such a formidable opponent. It was just that in Tianyang's view, I couldn't be bothered to get tangled up in cause and effect. I looked at the foolishly happy Su'er with relief. Congratulations to him for keeping his position as the 7th. In the evening, 4th brother found him. He threw a broad sword into his hands. He said it was bought by eldest brother from the blacksmith shop in town. They all noticed that Su'er seemed to be more skilled with weapons. In the future, patrolling the mountains will indeed be more imposing with this. This really made the little guy very happy. But then the 4th brother reminded him. Evidence is a very dangerous thing. If you can't focus your mind, you could easily be counterattacked. So in this competition, if both you and the 8th brother use weapons, maybe you won't win so easily. But you don't have to worry. I will teach you my demon-slaying sword technique. At that time, it won't just be ordinary skills. In the boy's eyes, though he didn't understand whether the sword technique was truly powerful, he knew that his brothers treated him very well. Naturally, he was determined to learn earnestly. He wouldn't let them down. The eager 4th brother, who longed to teach his sword techniques, noticed something else. In the past, the brothers had to plead with him to share his martial arts. It seems that fourth brother has grown to care for Su'er much more. The next day, the caravan just happened to pass by Wufeng Mountain. Although they had heard there were only a few small bandits ruling here, the caravan leader was restless because the cargo being transported was extremely important. He couldn't sleep all night. For safety reasons, a hefty sum was spent to hire a renowned protector from the underworld to escort the package. At that moment, a sudden cold arrow struck. It shot directly at the leader's knee. Fortunately, it was caught mid-air by Uncle Mu. Though it seemed the attacker only intended to intimidate, he still let out a cold laugh. Despicable and shameless. Bandits are just bandits. A group of nuisances even worse than wastrels. Looking at the group of Tianyang in front of him, they immediately announced the name of Lulin. They also demanded 50 taels in travel fees from the merchant group to pass. Mu Donglai felt these people were out of their minds. But since they were Lulin's thieves, there was no reason to let them leave alive. Tianyang also noticed that the other party seemed somewhat dissatisfied with Lulin's camp. Being able to catch cold arrows with bare hands surely indicates a skilled master. Thinking this, he immediately ordered his brothers to shoot arrows. But the other side just dodged. They actually used their swift sword to cut down each arrow. This scene made them feel as if they were seeing a ghost. They couldn't believe their eyes. This only heightened the other party's imposing aura. Once again mocking this group of people who are even worse than useless. Seeing his strong posture like this, Tianyang was getting anxious. On his first outing with the seventh brother to patrol the mountains, they encountered trouble. He thought if a fight broke out, the fourth brother had to protect him to escape. But at that moment, the boy suddenly appeared in front of everyone with a knife. In Schwer's eyes, his swordsmanship was fast. But there are countless flaws. We don't need the brothers to step in for this kind of thing. Since you're here, of course, we should actively help them. So I walked alone toward that dusky winter, and coldly said, Uncle, you've got big trouble now. No one at Wufeng Mountain can mock us. This is a pure boy filled with hostility. Though he has the mentality of only 6 years, he unexpectedly learned the 9 Heavens sword technique from the mystic maiden mirror. But he doesn't know just how strong he has become. However, under the careful guidance of his brothers in the stronghold, Su'er has already learned to show his fangs to outsiders. Looking at the suddenly surging anger of the seventh brother, Tianyang is not happy at all this time. He knows that the swordsman opposite him is not someone he can handle with just this little bit of strength. Though his estimation isn't wrong. That Mu Donglai on the other side is already ranked among the top 50 masters in this vast world of martial arts. But these days, Yang doesn't know this and doesn't understand. In the eyes of the young, the opponent's swordsmanship isn't strong. He thinks the older brothers must just be too lazy to take action. However, everyone's thoughts were different. Tianyang and the fourth brother were completely flustered. Mu Donglai felt extremely insulted by the little guy thrown over from the other side. In his anger, he raised his sword and charged at the youth. The sudden attack from the other side threw the brothers into confusion. As the opponent's sword was about to strike Su'er, everyone held their breath. Then there was a loud bang. Mu Donglai's sword had turned into scrap metal. This scene left the quick sword, who hadn't reacted yet. Tianyang and Lao Si, who were about to rush in to save him, were also stunned. At this moment, Su'er exuded a pressure that caused the leaves in the valley to swirl chaotically. It was only then that Mu Donglai managed to react. Just now, the boy had escaped his attack range with the smallest movement. And that arrow's might is likely the legendary sword's power. He felt the blood seeping from his neck. As he watched the boy approach step by step, a ghostly feeling surged in his heart. If that last sword strike had been intent to kill, he would have probably met his ancestors by now. Thinking of this, he no longer cared about saving face. Immediately lie flat on the ground, indicating their willingness to surrender double the bandits, only hoping not to be held accountable for their foolish actions. Seeing this, Su'er finally revealed a brilliant smile. The joy of finally being able to help his brothers filled him with immense happiness. But what he didn't know was that his brothers witnessing this scene. At this moment, the inner shock is far greater than the meager gains from the mountain patrol. After returning to the village, Tianyang couldn't hold back. He grabbed Su'er and asked if what he just saw was really the fourth exorcism sword technique. After receiving the little guy's affirmative reply, he found it even more unbelievable. So he suggested that the seventh show the exorcism sword technique in front of everyone. Su'er was unaware of his brother's intentions, but he didn't think there was any problem. So he happily accepted his request. When everyone arrived at the back mountain, the little guy was already in position, ready to perform the exorcism sword technique. However, the aura emanating from him was extremely fierce, causing the little sister to cover her mouth in surprise. But that wasn't all. Each exorcism sword move was executed with incredible mastery. In the end, the sword energy burst forth and struck a tree several meters away, piercing it cleanly, perfectly perforated. This scene frightened his brothers just as much as it did Mudong. But since it was their own brother, they soon cheered and rushed toward blood. They eagerly begged the seventh brother to teach them this sword technique. Meanwhile, the admiration from the little sister made the young man extremely shy. Only Tianyang and the fourth brother remained silent. They know their swordsmanship is nothing but third-rate techniques. To produce such destructive power from this thing, the problem must lie with this old seven. Only now do they realize that what they've picked up is more than just an ordinary little beggar. The old man is spitting pearls in front of the elder brother, mocking this counterfeit leader for being all show and no substance. He boldly claims he will take the position of chief of Wufeng Mountain today. The nearby old men wear expressions of ridicule. It seems they have already taken control of this counterfeit. They were small officials in the Right Path Alliance, feeling overlooked and unappreciated. They had long harbored thoughts of rebellion. However, there were very few wealthy bandit organizations in Luoyang. These few had not been able to find a good opportunity. But a few months ago, rumors suddenly spread that a very powerful deer spirit bandit stronghold had appeared out of nowhere on Wufeng Mountain. Any passing merchant convoy, regardless of size, couldn't avoid financial losses and disasters. Even the extremely strong Mudonglai was at their mercy. As a result, some people, including a few of them, came seeking fame. One by one, they properly paid their respects at the mountain stronghold. For a time, the entire village appeared to be thriving in both scale and popularity. Before long, winter had arrived. It was thought that, with everyone's efforts, they could enjoy a warm spring. But at this moment, the few already wild individuals began to stir restlessly. Secretly, they started plotting to force the village leader to reopen the ranking battles. After several patrols in the mountains, according to their observations, although the old seventh's martial skills are remarkable, the rumors of defeating Mudonglai should be exaggerated. As for Pang Tianyang, his breath is obviously weak, showing he is strong on the outside but empty inside. After thinking it over, they considered using the small stronghold as a springboard to advance further within the deer forest. Anyway, in Lulan, the rule is that the strong are respected. Moreover, they themselves are quite powerful. It's just that the Zhengdao alliance has been growing stronger in recent years, which makes them seem insignificant. And after the village suddenly grew from 10 to 25 people, the workload became increasingly heavy. Although Jiumei gained a group of younger brothers, they're all rough men, so he took the initiative to take on the main role. From time to time, he also pulled the easygoing Su'er in to help, but at this moment, he seemed particularly irritable. The village was small. He could hear the whispers of the newcomers very clearly. Inadvertently, he vented his frustrations at the innocent boy beside him. But when Su'er heard those people slandering the older brothers, Jiumei suddenly heard a loud bang. Looking back, he had split the entire table and cutting board in half out of anger. In the originally harmonious life, he truly didn't know that in Su'er's eyes, no one should ever slander her brothers. She stared at the boy, who was so different from usual, furiously wielding a kitchen knife as he headed towards the new wooden house. At that moment, I happened to run into third brother returning from the palace. He noticed that the seventh brother seemed troubled, so he called out to him. Upon hearing third brother's voice, Su'er's expression immediately changed. He replied softly. After learning about those guys' gossip and the little one's thoughts, third brother surprisingly appeared very indifferent. He was jokingly teaching the younger one how to get angry. If he hadn't witnessed it himself, I'm afraid the new recruits wouldn't make it through the new year in one piece. He had completely shed his usual rough demeanor while patrolling the mountains. He kindly reminded Su'er to learn how to find a balance. Once they got through this harsh winter, someone still had to patrol the mountains. He didn't want the young one to become a ruthless monster at such a young age. The provocation from those 5 old men towards the boss on the day of the ranked match was just too much. This made Tianyang feel a surge of frustration. But he knew those old men were indeed very skilled. With no other choice, he had to bring Su-er out again. He indicated that in the ranked match, they could start challenging from old 7. At that moment, it perfectly aligned with the little guy's wishes. Sha-Eat slowly approached the empty arena, nearly turning into a shadow. Though he kept reminding himself not to injure anyone seriously, as per Sanji's advice. Cannot be crippled. But coldly said to them, which dog wants to come first? The youth's rebirth ultimately displayed an unstoppable force. Yet it scared the old man Murong, one of the so-called 3 madmen, so much that his heart raced. Looking at the youth's momentum, they realized that they seemed to have a slight problem. So they urged the young man who came with them to take the lead. I originally wanted to back out. But suddenly, someone pushed me out. At that moment, the young man seemed imposing in his eyes. I felt like I was facing an overwhelming army. I was sweating profusely. To bolster my courage, I had to yell a few times at Su'er. However, unexpectedly, this roar knocked out his own front teeth. Since then, the little bald guy and the uncle were both carefully knocked unconscious by Su'er. This scene left both old men dumbfounded. The furious young man stared at them fiercely. In their eyes, Shu'er's arrogance felt like a nail driven into their chests. They were seething with anger. And now they found themselves in a dilemma. One of them suddenly had a bright idea. He cheerfully took out the iron fan and told the little guy that he had no habit of using weapons. Besides, we are family. As the saying goes, swords and blades have no eyes. Words fly like spit. Xia Shu'er ultimately decided to give up her weapon as well. But now he was completely different from a few months ago when he dealt with Chongshan. He had already realized that the martial arts he learned in the Xian female realm were quite profound. For a moment, he no longer looked down on the two of them. Although in the end, he did manage to beat the old dog, who claimed to be the second of the 3 madmen, into submission. He himself was injured by the iron fan. It was then he realized that the opponent was quite cunning. Seeing that only one person remained, he picked up the broad knife and planned to take another round. Looking at the slowly approaching youth, the old man Murong was already thoroughly afraid. The youth before him was definitely a monster. The old man's martial arts are not any worse than my own. In the end, he was still knocked out by this guy with bare hands. Though I felt unwilling, in a moment of desperation, I chose to respectfully admit my mistake to the boss. What should have been a disastrous conspiracy for Tianyang turned into a farce. It ended with Su'er's silly laughter. After the spring began, the stronghold returned to its previous harmonious life of mountain exploration. However, at that moment, news suddenly arrived from the Righteous Alliance's subordinates in Luoyang. The 2 old men, who had disappeared for months, appeared in the Wufeng Mountain Road Ling Mountain Bandit group. The person at the table, upon hearing this, seemed extremely pleased. He had long known that the 2 old fellows were resentful because he had taken their branch leader's position. But he never expected they would choose to defect to the Deer Spirit Alliance or that little-known mountain stronghold. However, upon inquiry, he discovered that the current leader of the stronghold had not changed. This greatly amused him. In recent months, he had also received multiple commissions from the government to eliminate bandits. In his view, Zheng Daomeng and Lu Lin were fundamentally incompatible, though he didn't care to expend effort on such an attack. Now that old Liang was in the stronghold, it was a different story. Upon learning that there were fewer than 30 people in this stronghold, he felt it was well within his grasp. However, his position as the top leader wasn't solely due to connections. Being cautious, he still chose to summon the alliance. Over 100 warriors. Only then did he feel it should be foolproof. With a stronghold of this scale, even if they all had the skills of 2 old masters, they couldn't possibly resist the hunt of so many skilled fighters. For him, though it was just a whim, he still brandished his sword towards Wufeng Mountain under the name of righteousness, to rid the world of harm. He is a punching bag for the family. Yet he is a treasure to his older brothers. Though his wife unexpectedly acquired an unparalleled sword technique in the abandoned warehouse, She respects these 6 brothers who treat him as their own more than anyone else. Liao Qiaochun, under his wife's leadership, is unstoppable. The village now seems very peaceful. At this moment, the little bald head found Su-er. Although his face still bore the mark of the beating he received, but the flattery just gets more and more dazzling. It's just that when he talks about certain profound internal skills, the art of flying flowers can harm people. This piques Su-er's interest greatly. But apart from the internal classic, he understands nothing about using internal energy. For a moment, he feels a severe headache. Just when he is lost in thought, a gasp came from behind. When he turned to look, he only saw a sea of flaming swordsmen rushing into the camp. In an instant, everyone was thrown into chaos. Tianyang, who was sound asleep, heard the commotion. With panda eyes, he opened the door to take a look. The scene instantly woke him up. He knew that Dicky was not scary. Staying calm is the top priority, brothers. Without hesitation, he shouted for everyone to not panic. If we rush out recklessly now, we'll only fall into the enemy's trap. After a quick thought, he immediately directed the brothers to build a second wall with corpses and wood in a safe area. They sprinkled water around to prevent the fire from spreading. At this moment, everyone truly realized the chief's bravery and wisdom. Without a word, he quickly picked up his weapon and built a second line of defense. But at this moment, Su-er was unaware that his thoughts were unusually dark. After the fire was extinguished overnight, the man outside was already showing an expression of confidence in victory. As they used their hooks to destroy the already fragile bakelite, the younger brothers beside him seized the opportunity to flatter him endlessly. But when he looked up, his expression instantly froze in place. He looked at the tall wooden wall 100 meters beyond the entrance. He only felt a burning heat on his face. His whole body trembled with anger. He could almost hear the mocking whispers of the group of swordsmen behind him. Imagine that he, Li Fugue, the backbone of the righteous alliance, was thwarted by a bunch of wild brutes. With no other choice, he could only grit his teeth and say that everything was still under control. So, with an axe in hand, he slowly walked toward the curtain wall. However, the 2 little brothers behind him were even more terrified at this sight. Though this section chief was young and capable, his mindset seemed a bit too arrogant. If this matter escalates within the station, no matter how skilled he is, he would still be in danger. At that moment, the old man Murong peeked through the gap in the wall and saw Li Fugue. The expression on his face was extremely unpleasant. He knew how powerful the opponent was. The wooden wall would definitely be breached in no time under his axe. He immediately shouted for his brothers to take out their bows and arrows to stop him from breaking the wall. But at that moment, Su-er slowly walked forward with a large knife. Everyone was momentarily uncertain about what this 7th leader was planning to do. However, the killing intent he exuded made everyone present too afraid to speak up and ask questions. At this moment, Li Fugue had already approached Mu Chang. He was not stingy. Stinginess means a heavy blow. In his mind, which was still somewhat functional, there was only one thing left to do: destroy this wall as quickly as possible. Otherwise, bringing so much knowledge and fuel, and having over 100 people standing outside the stronghold all night without even entering, would surely become a laughingstock in the Zhengdao alliance. Just as he was breaking through with brute force, suddenly, the curtain wall exploded from the inside out. A young boy suddenly appeared. He swiftly slashed at him with a knife. Although he reacted in time, they crossed blades for a brief moment. However, the impact of the boy's strike was immense. His entire palm and wrist were nearly unable to hold on. After that brief encounter, the husband, Li Fugue, looked at the boy walking slowly toward him. He felt an incredibly surreal sense of illusion. This person seemed like a monster crawled out of hell. He didn't know whether Su-er was good or bad now. He was increasingly resembling a demonic cultivator. But within the Righteous Path Alliance, there was the bloodthirsty Bai Yujin, and Mu Donglai, who intended to eradicate the real person. There was also Li's father, who wanted to seize the opportunity to protect their own stronghold. Under the education of Big Brother Pang Tianyang, Su-er has already determined that 5 Peaks Mountain is their private property. Since no lives have been harmed, it's only natural to collect some tolls. As a result, at this moment, facing the seemingly careless Li Fugue, He has already regarded the other party as a dead man. Seeing that the young man is unyielding, he feels a great headache. Though unaware of the other's depth, just based on that initial strike, it definitely won't be simple. But Li Fugui's pride prevents him from rallying 100 people to hunt a small fry. For a moment, he doesn't know what to do. However, Shuer doesn't care about his thoughts. Coming to someone else's territory to cause trouble comes with a price. So when are we going to start? Hearing this, made him grit his teeth in anger. After finally returning, his mind fell back into chaos. He pulled out the weapon and raised his hand toward Suer. It was his most proud signature move, the 13 winds of Qingfeng. Suddenly, Li Fugui's figure trembled in midair, and he conjured up 4 identical phantoms that moved differently. Together, they launched an attack on the Su family. The young man seized the opportunity. With one strike, he blocked all the assaults. At that moment, he realized that aside from the main body, everything else was just an illusion. After last night's reminder from the little bald head, Su had developed a great interest in this martial arts technique. He also mimicked the other's stance. Li Fugui was taken aback by this scene, but he didn't realize just how terrifying the other person truly was. In his eyes, although the Qingfeng 13 styles is a precursor skill of the Huashan Plum Blossom Divine Sword, among this generation of disciples, he was the only junior who had comprehended its profundities. But coincidentally, he was just an outer disciple. After returning to Hunan, he quickly became the top expert here. This has always been his source of pride. But all of this quickly became meaningless in the face of Suer's changing moves. In an instant, it vanished. The young man merely saw him demonstrate once, and executed the exact same technique. But Lin Zhan faced his opponent. He was completely unprepared for the shock. He focused his mind and began searching for the boy's true form. In the next moment, he completely lost his combat ability. He couldn't understand why all of the opponent's afterimages were just like the real body, and why he had surpassed his own skills after just one look. As Suer looked at the invader boy, who had been instantly crippled by him, he couldn't help but complain that he hadn't finished his performance yet. The other party fell down. This made Li Fugui, lying on the ground, spit out another mouthful of blood. He had no idea what kind of monster this was. But upon hearing that the other party was going to slit his throat, he lost all his bravado. He begged the young hero to spare him, promising he would never go near Wufeng village again. He was terrified the other party wouldn't believe him. He even swore a deadly oath. Upon hearing this, Blood thought for a moment and let him leave with his own people. In his view, this person was too weak. There really wasn't any reason to kill him. However, unbeknownst to him, a spy from who knows where had witnessed everything from a distance. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he had just seen. After a long silence, he vanished without a trace from the cliffside. When Suer returned to the village, the big fire had made him even more admired. Only a few older brothers were more concerned about whether he was hurt. When they learned the little guy was fine, the next day, one of them gave Suer a whack on the head. How could you destroy the wooden wall that everyone worked so hard to build? They were the pinnacle of beauty among the female bandits. Yet all rushed to be the young man's personal maids. Even the newly arrived Hame has admired him for a long time. The new and bright clothes were chosen after much deliberation for Suer to wear. But at this moment, the boy, like a moon surrounded by stars, looked particularly awkward. Since he can remember, he has been bullied by others, even his own family. They have always ignored him. While the older brothers in the village care for him greatly, he has never experienced the unreserved admiration of the girls. For a moment, he could only change the subject. He didn't understand why they suddenly had to stroll around the city in such luxury. Just this first restaurant in Zhengzhou looks like something he and his sworn brothers from the past could never afford. Hearing this, ninth sister got excited. In just a month of patrolling the mountains, seventh brother had made the entire village extremely prosperous. The number of people has also expanded compared to before. And Hame is famous for being sweet and lovely in the village. She escaped to the stronghold to avoid being forced into marriage by the thugs. Coincidentally, he was rescued by Jiume and helped with the work. The fourth leader specially gave him a sum of money. He said he must take you out to relax. Eat until you can't eat anymore. Play until you can't move before returning to the village. It's just that some are happy while others are worried. The righteous faction's strongholds around Wufeng Mountain have nearly all fallen into that young man's hands. They were originally the outposts set up by various sects and families across the country. It was more like a famous escort agency providing services for local chambers of commerce. If this continues, the reputation of the Righteous Alliance in Hunan province will be ruined. Expanding their influence will be even harder than ascending to the heavens. As for the situation in Zhengzhou, people even began to speculate. That red-haired youth is as strong as a monster. If they are disciples of the demon lord of the broken sky, then everything could make sense. The more they talked, the more they felt their guess was right. Given the demon lord's intimidation, some even suggested to avoid Five Peaks Mountain during the escort. Hearing this, Minister Zheng of Zhengzhou was so furious that his scalp went numb. He smashed the case in front of several people with a punch. Looking at the bloodied fist of Big Boss Sang, a few people just realized they had misspoken. The matter of the Dao Alliance needing to bypass the bandit stronghold. If this gets out, it might be worse than being robbed by the bandits. Seeing everyone coming to their senses, Old Master Sang then had someone prepare the Longjing tea he had brought back from West Lake. He had already sent it to his master a month ago. Although he is not the most powerful elder in Wudong, but he is nearly one of the top 10 masters in the martial world. Moreover, he is very protective of his disciples. If his disciple is in trouble, it should be almost time for him to arrive in Zhengzhou. I want to see how long this little thief can keep bouncing around. As for Schwer and the others who are enjoying their happy time, they naturally remain unaware. Just then, a bald, strong man suddenly walked into the 9th floor. I saw several of them, looking extremely cheerful. They slowly walked behind the two women. One of them spoke ominously to Ha Mei. Do you know how worried I've been about you? Ha Mei realized the marriage-pushing thug had found her. This made her break out in a cold sweat, but Nine Mei seemed quite speechless. He himself had once been sold to a brothel. He fled into the village. That strong man's dirty thoughts are crystal clear. But he's really clueless. Now, everyone in the underworld of Hunan knows who our boss Qidong is. I advise him kindly. He should just get lost. He'll regret it if he loses his life. But this thug seems to have not heard anything. In front of everyone, he had his hand on Ha Mei's shoulder. Sweet nothings kept flowing from his lips. Suddenly, a young voice interrupted from the side. Considering today's good mood, I'll give him 10 counts to disappear. Otherwise, he'll vanish before my eyes. The bald guy still hadn't realized the seriousness of the situation, only finding it amusing that he was being threatened by a boy. But he really couldn't let go of Ha Mei. Though he was extremely unhappy, but for the girl's sake, he just coldly asked if they had never heard of the pot dishes from Hejia village. Which family's little kids are you? Jiao Mei, while gnawing on the big soup dumpling that might soon be gone, told this silly rogue that they were from Wufeng village. And the person across from us is our 7th master. Hearing this, a bolt from the blue struck his mind. The youth across was already slowly getting up, and he counted to the last number. So you haven't left yet. Before he could even defend himself, he was kicked out by Sewer. This forcibly opened another side door for the inn. But apart from the sound of the wall breaking, there should have been many more sounds of plates shattering. Yet a cloaked man stomped his foot, silencing them all. At that moment, Su-Er realized there was an unusually peculiar old man beside him. What they didn't know was that the two of them should not have met at this time, but unexpectedly encountered each other in such a farce. The simple and cheerful girl set a trap for the young man. In order to help her little sister escape from being forced into marriage by a thug, Su-Er kicked the opponent out of the restaurant without holding back at all. However, she unexpectedly met the Wudong elder, Master Yu Ji. Upon learning that he had arrived in Zhengzhou, Master Sang hurried to the west of the city to welcome him. But he didn't give this disappointing disciple any favorable treatment at all. A mountain bandit actually went out of his way to invite him to handle this. This news, not just in Zhengzhou, even Wudong Mountain has already spread. All along the way, gossip is flying around. The president of the Righteous Alliance's branch is cowardly and anxious. Look, that Li Fugue can't even beat anyone else. He's afraid of losing this person too. So he invited a master who once ranked among the top 10 martial artists. Isn't this overkill for a pig? In every alley, the more they talked, the more excited they became. Although Brother Sang was angry listening to these people speak, they didn't feel the pain of the situation. But more than that, he was scared. What would his master think? Yet, seeing his master striding forward without looking back, he had still foolishly hoped that his master hadn't heard. But from afar, he heard a remark that made him think about retreating to Wudong Mountain for seclusion. In the end, he knows he cannot escape this calamity. Rather than facing Wufeng Mountain, he would prefer to honor his master properly afterward to seek forgiveness. Just then, the wall of the inn beside Master Yuji's suddenly collapsed, and a red-haired youth appeared before him. At the same time, the youth noticed his gaze. In that instant, their eyes met, and both had their own judgments in mind. The youth in the eyes of Master Yuji exudes an aura that is extremely pure and bright. He does not believe that the other party possesses extraordinary sword skills. It seems he should be an exceptionally talented martial arts genius. But in Su Er's eyes, the old man radiates an extremely ominous aura, making him feel a sense of impending danger. At this moment, old Master Sang also arrived at the scene. At a glance, he saw the red-haired youth from Wufeng Mountain. Though he didn't know why he was in Zhengzhou, he clearly remembered the battle with Li Fugue that day. From a distance, it was all very clear. He would never mistake that person. He immediately called out to his master, "It's him." But Master Yuji paid no attention to his words, and turned to leave. As Su Er watched the old man's back, she felt completely puzzled. What was this feeling, after all? At that moment, Jiao Mei and the others walked out from the harmful cave. They complained angrily that Su Er had caused too much trouble. They yearned for the boy's seemingly awkward and helpless expression. Suddenly, Jiao Mei had a thought. She took out the coins given by Si Gu. While saying that this amount of money isn't enough to compensate the tavern, he also mentioned that fourth brother specifically reminded him not to cause trouble for the village since they are expanding their recruitment. Seeing Shuer becoming increasingly anxious, Jiao Mei immediately told him that He Mei had been looking forward to this for a long time. This time, she wanted to buy a new outfit. She even covered He Mei's mouth, as she tried to deny it. She continued to apply pressure, saying that the brothers in the village also wanted to bring back some cured meat, but that would all be in vain. Finally, the young man couldn't hold on any longer. He timidly asked Jiao Mei if there was any way to resolve this. He was willing to do anything. Seeing that Su Er had fallen for it, Jiao Mei revealed a smirk of triumph. She said that as long as he taught her and He Mei martial arts, she could take care of everything for Su Er. At that moment, the departing Master Yuji told her confused and foolish disciple, "The youth cannot possibly be a disciple of that infamous demon lord. If he had such an outstanding disciple, he would surely be showing off all over the world. How could he be hidden away in this small Five Peaks mountain?" Thinking this, he felt as if he had struck gold. The top fortune from Nanshan Temple is indeed effective. It really has brought him such good luck. This is an old man, nearly a master of the martial world, called Blood Eagle. I received a top-tier fortune at Nanshan Temple. I traveled thousands of miles to Zhengzhou. I plan to meet the legendary youth of Wufeng Mountain. Just a few days ago, the leader of the Wudang sect received a letter from the Zhengzhou branch of the Zhengdao Alliance. It said that near Wufeng Mountain, all the Alliance's outposts were unable to operate. They were blocked in front of them. He is a red-haired boy suspected of being a disciple of the Breaking Heaven Demon Lord. Originally, it was just an ordinary plea for help. But this matter became extremely sensitive in the hands of the sect leader. He summoned his junior disciple, Yuji, to discuss this issue. It turns out that the relationship between the Righteous Alliance and the Dear Spirit Alliance was already maintained in a very fragile balance. If this matter truly involves the Breaking Heaven Demon Lord, it becomes extremely different. It was just handled poorly. I'm afraid the two major forces will completely go to war because of this. Ironically, the person in charge of the Zhengzhou branch is an outer disciple of this Yujishi. If he sends an inner disciple to handle it, it would be the most reasonable course of action. However, this matter left Yujiji very confused. In his view, among the top 10 experts today, 9 are in the Righteous Alliance. If war really breaks out, would we still fear a mere heavenly demon lord? But at this moment, the sect leader suddenly appeared extremely wise. In his eyes, this matter was already clear to him. He knew about the young man who was rising in this way. It's impossible that he is the disciple of that demon lord. But since he is in the Spirit Deer Alliance, it's better to remove him early. Moreover, what he is more worried about is that although the Spirit Deer Alliance is not as powerful as the demon sect led by the Moon Demon, the Moon Demon nearly overturned the entire martial world with his own strength back then. Who can guarantee that such a thing won't happen again? And we can no longer rely on the two builders. If we go to war against Lulan Gate now, the suffering of the people could lead to the entire martial arts world becoming unprecedentedly weak. At that time, the court will intervene, and I fear that various sects in the rivers and lakes will gather strength in the southern city. Considering all these factors, it would trouble the marshlands to mobilize troops. After learning about the thoughts of the sect leader, Master Yuji also did not refuse, but unexpectedly expressed a desire to go in person. He said that every day he would casually take a divination at Nanshan Temple on the mountainside. However, over the years, there had never been any significant omen. Yet today, he unexpectedly drew an exceptionally good fortune. It seems he must have a significant gain from this journey. But now, in Wufeng village, everyone is almost entirely immersed in an illusion of invincibility. In a short time, the expansion of the stronghold was faster than the court's conscription. It not only took in a group of long-oppressed women and children, but also invited the best carpenters from the nearby town to build a gathering place for them. Yet at that moment, looking at the happy children, Tianyang fell into silence. When asked by fourth brother, he simply said he was reminded of some past events. Meanwhile, Suer was instructing Jume and Hume in martial arts. He imparted the Nine Heavens Heart method to the two of them through both words and deeds. But the complex incantations made it so they couldn't remember even 3 sentences. They felt quite distressed for a moment. However, in Suer's view, this was not a difficult task. He stated that with focused practice for 10 years, they could master it. But no matter how they heard it, his words didn't seem to encourage their spirits. They could only follow Suer's request to calm their minds and focus. Gradually, they became completely immersed in it. It was also the first time for the boy to see others practice. It was as if some vague things from the past became clear. His heart resonated. He startled himself and laughed. He began to refine his mental mantra. The dusk was deep. Jiomei drowsily opened her eyes. It feels like I've just had a good sleep. I feel very energized. But the scene before me leaves me stunned. I remind the just awoken Hume to stay quiet, while watching the boy in front of me, lost in thought. At this moment, he is actually floating in midair. His spirit is completely immersed in a realm of imagination. Ants are swinging the Nine Heavens sword technique hundreds, if not thousands, of times. What they don't know is, a terrifying news suddenly spread through the village, like a disaster that enveloped everyone's heart. The youth is immersed in the sea of the world, practicing the Nine Heavens sword technique. There were some unexplainable difficulties before, but he found insight while guiding others to rest. Since escaping the old warehouse, Suer has made no progress, recalling the appearance when practicing swordplay with the figure in the mirror. In the past, it seemed that all training led only to assassination, but at this moment, the differences between the two became indistinguishable. As the two observed Suer's cultivation, they were astonished to see 5 lotus flowers appearing above her head, gradually blooming, revealing a golden radiance. At this point, Suer had finally mastered the techniques from the mysterious mirror, and the 5 golden lotuses scattered with her eyes opening once more. The two of them gazed at Suer, who looked like a celestial being. In that moment, they were overwhelmed with excitement. They didn't care whether she understood the situation. They rushed over and babbled nonsense. The little one blushed deeply. She responded to their starry-eyed gazes. As long as they practiced diligently, the mantra she taught them could naturally be as good as his. Seeing that it was getting late, the 3 of them, chatting and laughing, planned to return to the village. However, they didn't notice that the village was unusually quiet. Meanwhile, the elder brother Tianyang stood at the village entrance, his expression unreadable. Hearing Suer's voice, he didn't turn around. With a tone filled with fear, reluctance, and helplessness, he told him that Master Yujia would bring people to attack Wufeng village tomorrow. That person was a super figure, second only to the top 10 masters of the martial world. But unexpectedly, the president of the Zhengzhou Zhengdao Alliance branch is a disciple of Yuki. And such an important figure actually came in person to lead the team. Facing the overwhelming sense of pressure, Tianyang appeared weak and exhausted in front of his younger brother. He had already sent the women and children back to pack their things, to avoid the trouble for now. Meanwhile, the others were waiting in the assembly hall for him to take charge of the situation. But in this situation, his footsteps sounded particularly heavy. After a while, the hall was indeed filled with panic. Among them, the old man Murong understood best what the words real person Yujia represented. The words he spoke were utterly devoid of hope. In his view, Wufeng village was finished. Yujia is the strongest master in the current Wudang sect, even among his inner disciples. Each of them can easily deal with their own kind of rogue. But he came in person. This is no longer something that can be resolved with any tricks or cleverness. The only way now is to escape from the hideout. In a situation where everyone goes their separate ways, there's a chance of not being found. With a bit of luck, he might just save his life. His words became increasingly agitated, as if he wanted to use this method of spreading fear to mask the panic within. That's all I have to say. He turned and left the village without looking back. Watching this scene, the villagers almost all began to follow Murong as he gradually departed. But surprisingly, Chongshan firmly stated he would stay in the village. No matter how his friends persuaded him, he remained steadfast. Yet deep down, he was afraid. But seeing that Jiumei had no intention of leaving, Zhong was uneasy. He was reluctant to leave just like that. Before long, only 10 people were left in the hall. Besides Su'er and his original 7 brothers, there were also Chongshan, Jiumei, and Hame. At this moment, Tianyang showed with embarrassment, he expressed his apologies to everyone. But he is reluctant to leave the village. Besides, those children should have hoped to return here. Thinking of this, he feels that he is too useless as the village chief. He slams his fist on the armrest of the chair. This sends a few leaves fluttering down from the eaves. They slowly fall into Su'er's hand. He doesn't know how he compares to that immortal lady. But at this time, it seems that only I can try my best. And in his heart, this is the only way back. No matter how strong the opponent is, I absolutely cannot let it be taken away. The ancient-style battle has ended. Under this man's decision, it is completely disbanded. Originally, after most people had left, Schwer means that if the Jade Princess isn't as dangerous as they say, then what reason do we have not to give it a try? The brothers have great confidence in Schwer's abilities. Everyone felt a lot more at ease for a moment. But Pang Tianyang recalled what old man Murong had said, and still felt anxious. He wasn't wrong. We are all too reliant on Schwer. But this time, the enemy is too powerful. Su'er is so young. What if he dies at the hands of the Jade Emperor? Wouldn't I regret it for the rest of my life? Thinking this, he let out a quiet sigh. In the end, he spoke up to everyone, suggesting that the windless stronghold disband. The great fire, which had just regained confidence thanks to Su'er's words, suddenly fell silent. Everyone couldn't believe what their leader was saying. But it seems that fourth brother knows what he is thinking. He didn't say anything. He just took Su'er and the others away from the Hall of Brotherhood. The usually cheerful rough man, Pang Tianyang, wore a gloomy expression all the way to the great fire. Late at night, he hurriedly built a new wall by himself. Looking at his trembling hands, he remembered that he indeed hadn't done any work himself for too long. It's always been everyone. Suddenly, the rope of the curtain wall snapped. It fell straight down towards the ground. At this point, he was already out of strength. Just when he thought he would be crushed to death, the fourth brother suddenly appeared in front of him. With a grin, he said, "See? You don't work hard usually, and now you're in trouble." At that moment, he realized everyone was right there. It seemed like the third brother also seized the chance to mock their own. "Eldest brother, you didn't actually think we were leaving, did you?" Meanwhile, Tian gazed at this scene for a long time. He didn't feel at all that they were mocking him. Instead, he gave a bitter smile. He knew this deadlock was no longer something he faced alone. But he also understood that they might all end up meeting the same fate. He just understands everyone's feelings. Just like Su'er said, this is their home. Having left Wufeng village, they have nowhere to go. Thinking of this, Tianyang stopped being coy. Since that's the case, let's all take a chance together. What does this so-called deadlock matter? With the help of my brothers after a while, we quickly raised the barrier again. Everyone sat around the fire discussing. To prevent a surprise attack from the enemy, we still had to take turns keeping watch. But in the end, Tianyang couldn't hold back, and expressed his gratitude to the brothers. His trust in himself moved him deeply. This pretentious scene even made Sister Nine a bit uncomfortable. Suddenly, she spoke up and said, "Since we all have to live and die together, the boss shouldn't be so stingy. Why don't we make a pact? Let's become sworn brothers and sisters. This way, there's no need for thanks. Isn't that right?" Chongshan and Hame looked on in surprise at her words. But Tianyang instead burst into laughter. "Since that's the case, from today on, we are all family. I'll be relying on everyone from now on." This scene made Suer feel particularly strange. Clearly, we might not survive until tomorrow. Yet everyone here can feel each other's warmth. I don't quite understand what this emotion is. But he really hopes this moment could last forever. However, everyone hasn't rested all night. Unknowingly, they talked until dawn. At this time, hundreds of people in the city followed the cloaked Yuji Jinren towards Wufeng Mountain. With my best fortune, we will meet soon. The robbery at Wufeng Village. The fragrance of the canyon remains even in death. For Suer, his life has never been as happy as it is now. Even as he is about to face an insurmountable deadlock, he simply can't let his brothers know how uncertain he feels when facing Yuji. Though the Nine Heavens sword technique is profound, he does not believe he can triumph against someone of such stature in the martial world. When his brothers fall asleep, the little guy sneaked to the front of the village. It seems he hopes for even the slightest progress. He forces himself to immerse in the sea of stones to hone himself. The opponent's fame tightens the young man's heart even more. Though tired like his brothers, he feels no trace of sleepiness. But at that moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind him. He was startled. The secret path was too careless. He immediately swung his blade at the newcomer. But upon getting a better look, he realized it was his older brother, Pang Tianya. He knew everyone had been too reliant on Shuer. But no matter how powerful the little one was, she was still just a child. And this time, their opponent was someone even a mid-tier sect wouldn't dare to face. How could he possibly feel at ease with that kind of pressure on a young person? As expected, the little guy, sporting panda eyes, was still foolishly saying he couldn't sleep. Looking up at Suer like this, he knew that nothing he said would help. Drawing his weapon, he charged at Suer. "Since you can't sleep, let your big brother help you stretch your muscles." Hearing this, Suer first felt a bit, then broke into a wide smile. Indeed, no amount of thoughts or unease is as good as letting oneself engage wholeheartedly in a fight. So, Suer put away her techniques, and relied on her petite frame to spar with her older brother. It was just the right time of spring chill. Tianyang was already sweating profusely, and Suer finally felt much lighter in her heart. But at that moment, the sound of many approaching footsteps outside the village followed. The sound didn't stop until it reached the outer wall. Tianyang knew that the great battle was about to begin. But before Suer could react, he suddenly leaped onto the wall. Though he knew how terrifying the opponent was, he told Suer that he was the boss. No matter who the opponent was, standing in front of everyone is your duty. While the leader of the Righteous Path Alliance, Sang, was mocking how this small character dared to show up, Tianyang gave a sinister smile. "Sang Huiran, you pathetic fool. You don't dare to stir up trouble here, thinking that if you find that senile old man, we would be afraid? What a mockery." Sang Lauda felt a chill run down his spine. As expected, the master slowly walked forward from behind him. "Although I told you not to act impulsively, I can't let this unreasonable person tarnish my reputation." A roar filled with pure internal energy shot up towards the sky. At that moment, Suer inside the wall sensed something was wrong. Immediately, with a furious roar, she used her true energy to block the opponent's attack. In just an instant, Tianyang hadn't reacted yet, when the barrier was blasted open by impacts from both sides. At the same time, Yuan Ji landed on one foot, instantly appearing before Tianyang, who was about to fall, with her long sword drawn. Su realized the situation was dire. He immediately stomped the ground. Qi surged into the blade. In an instant, he unleashed a sword energy towards Yuji. All previous fear and unease turned to ashes. At that moment, she had only one thought. No one could harm her big brother. But the opponent just twisted with the wind. He easily deflected the sword energy that was invincible in Su-er's hands far away. With the explosion of the mountain behind, Yu-ji realized that the boy's internal power was somewhat exaggerated. She could no longer pay attention to the small character who was just making noise. The two of them stood together. It was just a moment. The boy was struck and sent flying by a single sword strike. Although Su-er managed to stabilize his stance. But he seems to have realized some things. He can truly feel the other person's power. But I should be stronger than him. The youth faces the sword saint of Wudong. The earth and sky sword sect's pressure comes down like solid form. In the old man's eyes, he has never seen such a fearless junior. He actually feels he can surpass himself. In a fit of rage, he displayed the Wudong's foremost sword technique, the Taiji sword. Gazing at the youth, he smiled and asked, "Do you still think you are stronger than me?" He initially just wanted to make him back down. After all, even the Heavenly Emperor sword sect couldn't control their power freely. But upon seeing Su-er for the first time, he already felt an overwhelming desire for wealth. Adding to that, the youth's extremely abnormal inner strength makes it truly hard to let him perish at this moment. Yu-ji is famously protective of his students in the Wudong sect. This is also because he teaches tirelessly. Any gifted individual who comes to his ears will, if possible, be taken into his sect. Although he has now escaped into the vast sky, but the moment he saw Su-er, he realized that those disciples were worlds apart from her. At that moment, Su-er appeared serious. But she didn't think for a second that she would lose. She still claimed to be stronger than him. This completely enraged the nearly legendary Yu-ji. However, though the youth was arrogant, he faced the above move. Yu-ji still couldn't gain the upper hand. At this time, the fourth brother and the others rushed over upon hearing the sounds. Seeing that Su-er was evenly matched with the opponent, they realized this was not a place for them to interfere. So they took the leader and withdrew to a distance. After a brief skirmish, Yu-ji became increasingly surprised. She couldn't help but begin to doubt whether he was truly a disciple of that demon lord. Under inquiry, the young man merely pointed his sword at the sky, indicating that his martial arts came from above the 9 heavens. At this moment, Yu-ji didn't fully grasp its deeper meaning, but it seemed that the other party truly did not regard her highly. This was why he manifested this world. The Taiji and Bagua behind the sword sect moved almost at will. Kusur's practical experience is not rich. He cannot discern the depths of this world. He can only rush forward to test it personally. The old man spread his arms wide. Just as the young man was about to strike him, it was as if time and space were misaligned. He himself was instead wounded on the left arm by a sword. After staggering to steady himself, but lost track of the other person. As the sense of pressure approached from behind, Su-er felt something was wrong. She immediately turned around to block this seemingly slow yet lightning-fast attack. But she was still a step too late. She was struck by a sword from Yujia. This anger made Tianyang and the fourth feel a cold sweat at the same time. But it felt like something was stuck in their throats, unable to utter a single word. But at this moment, Su-er had already leaped back, maintaining a considerable distance from the opponent. The young man knew he had overstepped. Approaching seemed to play right into the opponent's hands. But now, there wasn't much he could do. He thought it best to keep his distance and plan. Just as Su-er was contemplating his strategy, the opponent first launched a strike with sword energy. Then, unexpectedly, they chose to leap into the air. At this moment, the companions had also arrived. They gazed at the incredible scene before them. Almost simultaneously, they gasped in astonishment. The old man gathered an enormous Taiji diagram in the air. With a single sword wave, he pointed the sword at the youth. At that moment, Su-er felt as if the sky was collapsing and the earth was splitting apart. It was extremely difficult to stay steady on her feet, but there was no time to react at all. A massive beam of light slammed down to the ground. The crowd was so shocked that they almost got caught up in it. However, the blinding light made it impossible for them to see until the impact was over. Yet, Yuji Jinren showed no signs of joy at all. This move was the pinnacle technique of Wudong. It seems the youth has long been turned to dust. But before he could feel any regret, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. In front of him, a golden light erupted from the swirling dust. Among it, a pair of even brighter eyes were staring intently at him. Yujia looked at this terrifying yet familiar scene in disbelief. Before him was a golden true dragon, gazing down at him with eyes that looked down upon the world. Under a fortune. The agile dragon. This has been a lingering thought in the old man's heart. 25 years ago, he experienced what it meant to be weak and powerless before this golden dragon soul. Now, by some strange twist of fate, he encounters it again. The boy and that former figure gradually overlap. At this moment, he finally understands who he is facing in this duel. This is the renowned ultimate skill of the Sword Saint of the Nine Heavens. He no longer looks down on Su-Er in the slightest. The boy's move has cast a shadow in the hearts of countless heroes. This includes Yuji herself. He is very happy to have the chance to fight him again. But he is also very afraid. Afraid of the power that the entire martial world cannot rival. Yet he is also very fortunate. He is grateful for his good fortune. For over a decade, he has made no progress in his cultivation. To have such an opportunity is rare. The outcome of this battle is no longer important to him. The Heavenly Emperor sword sect instantly drained all of his inner strength. It collided with this unparalleled sword technique. The entire valley was left with terrifying claw marks. Yujizi, still unsteady, stood there. The sword sect behind him has already fallen apart. At this moment, he is at the end of his strength. His inner energy is exhausted. Facing the boy's second sword attack, he has no strength left to fight. A mouthful of blood spills from the corner of his mouth. Yet, relying on his will, he raises his sword again. He will confront him with one more strike. Even if I fall here, I must see this second move. But Su-Er has already noticed the old man's condition. In this exchange, he did not use the Nine Heavens sword technique again. After wounding his left shoulder, the old man calmly said, "You have lost." Yujizi was left in complete shock. But I felt utterly helpless. I just stood there quietly. After a while, I struggled to ask, "Can you tell me your name?" Su-Er turned to face the sunlight and told Yujizi. He is the old wife of Lu Su-Er from Wufeng village. Upon hearing this, the old man finally showed a bitter smile. The long sword in his hand slowly fell to the ground. He was like this back then too. I understand, this must be my limit. As Yujizi fell to the ground, both the Righteous Alliance and the people from Wufeng village were completely stunned. After a moment, Tianyang softly called out. Su-Er feared that all of this was just a dream. He was afraid he would shatter it himself. But after seeing the little guy safe and sound, the brothers cheered almost simultaneously. Jiao Mei tightly embraced the overjoyed old demon, who was in tears. For a moment, all the gloom was swept away by Shui-Er's strength. Tianyang happily lifted the little guy up. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, they overcame the biggest crisis in the history of the Five-Seal stronghold. Looking at the boy's satisfied expression, in the stronghold, Yujizi suddenly had a feeling that she might be able to make further progress on this Five Paths road. After much thought, she made a surprising decision in her heart. So she called in the Songhui people, and told them to go back on their own. As for the Wufeng village, if they can take a detour in the future, then they should. He himself will stay at Wufeng Mountain for some time. Meanwhile, Bai Yujin in Luoyang City has invited all the elders from the Lu family's older generation. After several years of development, Yuer's elder brother Lu Yuan has already mastered the Nine Heavens sword technique that his father taught him during childhood. Bai Yujin appears quite pleased at this moment. Over the years, he has managed this Wulong villa, holding great power. But these old fellows have always had a resistance due to being female. Now, however, her eldest son's Nine Heavens sword technique has already reached perfection. This led to the scene of Lu Yuan standing with a sword in the training arena. Though only this one move remains from the sword technique, the imposing aura of the golden dragon standing there made all the elders turn their heads. With a single swing of the sword, 3 terrifying palm prints instantly appeared on the ground, and witnessing this power that could tear everything apart, the elders understood as well. No matter how much they resisted, the true master of Wulong Mountain Manor would inevitably belong to him. Bai Yujing, the bandit hideout is thriving again. Yet the man looked grim. This was already the 12th deserter crying and begging to return to the hideout. Without exception, they all swore they would never be angered again. Then Tianyang raised his hand. Just as he was about to strike the other person, he suddenly appeared very accommodating. Kwang Wei gestured to the newcomer that it was good to return. This scene left nearly everyone looking astonished. They had all chosen to be allies in times of danger. Even the village chief forgave them. They were all deeply moved by it. Tahu took a moment to thank the village chief before leaving the assembly hall. But at this point, the fourth one couldn't stand it any longer. He really couldn't understand why such a group of people would make the eldest stay. When they found the eldest brother, they complained endlessly. But Tianyang actually had quite a few thoughts. They once hoped that joining the Green Forest would grant them protection. But in the end, they realized that no matter which side they chose, in the end, it all comes down to your strength. Even knowing in advance that Master Yuji is coming to attack the Lulin Alliance, there hasn't been a hint of movement. Although I am also very angry. This only indicates one thing. This organization has not actually recognized us. And with the Green Forest Summit approaching, we need to gain recognition. This is an opportunity we cannot miss. It's impossible for just the 10 of us brothers to go. We need to make a show of strength first. But you see, most of us here are ordinary people. We've come to the village seeking refuge due to various forms of oppression. None of us are really criminals. And when faced with danger, fleeing is instinctual. But if we were criminals, it would be like stabbing each other in the back. Leaving them behind is just a matter of having a few extra mouths to feed. After all, someone has to take care of the house and guard the area, right? Upon hearing this, Lao Si finally felt relieved. He then asked about Su Er's whereabouts. At that moment, a letter arrived deep in Wufeng Mountain. Though it was the advice of the sect leader's senior brother, it was said that staying in the Luling Alliance's stronghold would bring negative effects to the younger generation. I hope the junior can return to the mountain immediately to attend the sect meeting. However, after seeing the letter, Yujizi didn't pay it any mind. He casually tossed it into the wind. At this moment, Shuer also arrived. This little guy was quite concerned about Yujizi's stay. He was deeply afraid that he would do something detrimental to the brothers. But in the end, it was he who ordered the hundreds of swordsmen to leave. This left Shuer with no choice but to refrain from taking action against the old man. He could only glare fiercely at Yujizi in front of him. He asked what he really wanted to do, and when he would be willing to leave. Seeing Suer's impatient expression, Yujizi felt inexplicably much more at ease. Being able to make this little monster feel fidgety was indeed quite a joyful thing. But they didn't know. At this time, in the various cities near Wufeng Mountain, the rumors of the 5 peaks and 10 oddities were spreading everywhere. First, there was the one-character quick sword, Mu Donglai, followed by the top expert of Hunan, Li Fugue. Even the nearly top martial artist, Yu Jiezhenren, was defeated by them. But these were just rumors after all. Most people merely took them as entertainment over tea and meals. But at that moment in a tea house, there was also a drunk man, who laughed openly, saying that all of this must be true. This man was Li Fugue, who had his swordsmanship secretly learned by Shuer, and was then easily defeated. In his perception, the youth's power was already beyond reach. It was absolutely possible for him to battle that Jade Princess. At this moment, no one recognized who he was. Curiously, they gathered around this man who seemed to know something. Now he spends his days drinking away. The blow from the young man has etched itself into his very bones. He has long lost his former pride. He doesn't mind venting to these common folks. The speaker is unintentional, but the listener is attentive. Everything was heard clearly by the man in green nearby. He immediately headed straight to the headquarters of the Deer Forest Alliance in Hunan. He reported everything he had heard to the leaders. At this point, the one-eyed man remembered. The 5 Peaks stronghold of Deer Forest was indeed a title he had bestowed. He just didn't expect them to survive until now. Facing Yujizi, they could still fight and win. He couldn't tell if it was true or false. But at that moment, the minister behind the scenes suddenly made a strange sound. Our Lulin Alliance summit is approaching. Since those people have such rumors, it seems necessary for our president to personally visit Wufeng Mountain. He is the strongest disciple of the Wudang sect in a century. 15 years ago, he had already mastered the Taiji sword technique to the realm of 4 symbols returning to 2 instruments. But no matter how hard he practiced, He ultimately could not cross this threshold, and thus made no progress over the years. But when he was defeated by the youth's 9 heavens sword technique, he understood. This might be his last opportunity in this life, an opportunity to break through his own limits, and approach the supreme realm of his ancestor. Thus, the esteemed sword saint of Wudong clung to life and remained in this dear forest martial wind village. But how would Su-er know his desires? All he wanted was to drive away this dangerous element, who could not be subdued by anyone but himself. Yet Yujizi slowly rose. First, she dashed toward the young man. Then she swung a punch. But to Su-er, it seemed she had no intention of attacking him at all. There was completely no sign of wanting to dodge. Although Yujizi's fist indeed stopped half an inch in front of him, what surprised the young man was that the sturdy bamboo behind him was smashed to pieces by the old man's punch, despite it being blocked by his head. Seeing the little guy's astonished gaze, the old man proudly retracted his fist. He intentionally or unintentionally reminded Schwer that although he possessed immense internal power and unparalleled sword skills, but he seems to have no concept of controlling and utilizing power. If the young man hopes to make further progress, he first needs to understand the basic concepts of martial arts. Seeing the little guy wavering, Yujizi increased the stakes again. I don't need you to become my disciple. I just want to make a deal with you. What I lack is an understanding of the almost limitless potential of Tai Chi. You have the experience to break through limitations. We can complement each other's strengths. Give me a bit of advice. I will also tell you how to comprehend and summarize martial arts. So, Lu Su'er, how will you choose? At this moment, in the vast mountains far from the martial world, a true demon is quietly being born. A man is gradually having his soul extracted. He is slowly turning into a human husk. The cultists nearby look very pleased at this sight. Lowering their heads, they fervently congratulate the master. Not only has his power been restored, but he has also completely broken through to the demon god realm. And the man hears this. Just a grin. 16 years ago, I was indeed too impatient. But from now on, I will make those 2 self-proclaimed sword gods, the little punks from the martial god realm, and the entire Jianghu submit to me, the night moon fairy. Half a month later, Su'er and the old man are deep in training on 5 Peaks Mountain. An old and a young, confirming each other. The sun is already setting over 1,000 miles. Things are different now. At this time in the village, besides Su'er, it seems that everyone is gradually getting familiar with the old Taoist. He also appears very friendly to the children here. It's dusk. After her training, Jiu Mei is chopping wood in the mountains. A large bundle of stone wood is no longer such a struggle for this girl. At that moment, the old man suddenly appeared behind him. He took the wood from his hands with one hand. This left Jiu Mei extremely surprised. In her eyes, shouldn't a dignified Wudong elder have a lofty and imposing demeanor? But the old man simply carried the wood, chatting casually with Jiu Mei as he walked. He once harbored deep prejudice against bandits. But at least in his eyes, this bandit lair and these bandits were a very pleasant sight. In his perception, most mountain bandits treat human life as worthless. But the people here seem to be surviving, having no choice but to escape their former lives. And the old man here doesn't mind the trouble of taking in everyone. Schwer is more like a deity here, guarding this stronghold. He is extremely curious. Under what conditions could such 2 people come together, making this place as harmonious and stable as a paradise? When Sister Nine heard the old man's question, she revealed her gentleness. Perhaps it's because the eldest truly treats everyone as family. One calculated everything but ended up with nothing, while the other remained unassuming, humble and open-minded. This is clearly reflected in these 2 old men. When Murongbai learned that the Wudong elder was going to personally attack the bandit stronghold, he was the first to stand up and declare that Wufeng village was doomed. He gathered a group to part ways with the village. But at this moment, he looked restless. A group of younger brothers eagerly surrounded him, recounting the rumors of recent days. They were not only unbelievable, but everyone around here was saying that Wufeng village not only took in the old, weak, women and children, but also provided them with food and shelter. Yet Murong still couldn't believe it. He even suspected that the Jade Lady was simply unwilling to act personally. But now, their situation wasn't much different. They had originally planned to wait for Wufeng village to be leaderless. I appeared like a savior, naturally taking over this small stronghold, then gradually climbing to a position in the Deer Forest Alliance. But what can be confirmed now is, those guys have not been eliminated. Their reputation only makes them stronger than before. Plus, the group of followers around me has started to have doubts. I must find a way to give them a means to survive. If this continues, he may have no choice but to go to the bandit stronghold. But I've heard that the place is extremely cruel. Let alone these little brothers. Even if he goes himself, he might soon become cannon fodder. Thinking of this, the old man Murong awkwardly burst into laughter. It indicates that they initially only left temporarily, to protect the survival of the village. They must also be waiting for us to return. And no one in this village understands the situation in the martial world better than us. There shouldn't be any problems. But the few younger brothers nearby are not fools. Although they think Murong speaks more sweetly than he sings, now they can only pin their hopes on him. So everyone awkwardly echoed the big brother's reputation. After Yu was defeated by Su-er, she not only confirmed the martial arts with him, but also generously guided the villagers in practicing martial arts. When old Murong returned to the entrance of the village with a group of people, he looked at the broken walls and the muddy ground, not at all bothered by the disdainful glances from the crowd. Right now, he only felt that in this seemingly ordinary little village, like a terrifying beast of a flood lying in wait. But at that moment, Chongshan suddenly appeared before them. His words were full of mockery. He said that not only was he older than the others, but his skin was also thicker than theirs. And hearing Chongshan's voice made Murong feel even more furious. If it weren't for the fact that people of his class could never return to the Zhengdao Alliance, he truly couldn't lower himself to return to Wufeng village, making the atmosphere tense. At this time in the village, Tianyang also received news that old Murong was back. The fourth brother expressed his annoyance, saying he really disliked that old guy. Whether it was encouraging everyone to abandon the village, or his constant rebellious attitude. If he comes back, the village is likely to become extremely unstable again. Facing this issue, Tianyang also felt quite troubled. In terms of martial power, the old man is the strongest in the village aside from Su-er. Moreover, he understands the affairs of the martial world better than any of us. Perhaps his return could inspire everyone to practice harder. This is the first time Tianyang has faced such pros and cons. He is unsure how to navigate it. At this time, Rongshan's skills have advanced rapidly thanks to the guidance of Shui'er and Ugz during their free time. His martial arts have improved by leaps and bounds. Besides, he was a veteran who had just returned from the front lines. He never thought he would lose to that old man Murong again. He even chose to confront him directly at the gate. Although Murong was shocked that his opponent could last through several moves, he merely felt that this was excessive confidence. Even while getting beaten on the ground, Chongshan didn't forget to berate him for being a coward who shrank back. This only made Murong more humiliated and angry. He mobilized his inner energy, intending to attack him, though he dared not kill him immediately. In his anger, he vowed to break several of his bones. But at that moment, a finger suddenly pressed against his forehead. Another old man appeared before him, along with his stepson. They said that although they didn't know who he was, making a sneak attack in front of them couldn't be ignored. At this moment, Murong was already sweating profusely. Until now, he hadn't even noticed this person's presence. Not only had they appeared before him in an instant, but they had also blocked his way with a single piece of paper. In this mountain stronghold, besides that little monster, how could such a terrifying person exist? And when he heard Chongshan say he didn't need Ugz's help, he hadn't even used his full strength yet. Murong was so scared that his legs went weak. He nearly knelt down. He never expected that a dignified Wudang elder would appear in this village. He seemed quite familiar with their group, but the other party didn't care about his thoughts. Gently, he reminded Chongshan, judging the power gap between the two sides is also a form of cultivation. This person is indeed several times stronger than you. At the same time, a voice filled with anger slowly comes from afar. Old man Murong, you made such a big commotion back then. Now you come back. I think you should be prepared. Right? He is the sword god Lu's youngest son, but because he is not born of the main wife, he is regarded as a bastard. He is also ignored by his father. This has led him to suffer humiliation from birth. After his father passed away, he was locked in a warehouse by his stepmother for over 10 years. Fortunately, he accidentally learned an unparalleled sword technique in the realm of Xiannu. After escaping from Luoyang, he was picked up by bandits again. What surprised him was that his brothers, the horse bandits, were kind-hearted. They treated him like family. It was then that Su Er's life finally began to brighten. And in the face of danger, the young instigator of the desertion showed no mercy to the old man. Even Yuji, who was watching, was taken aback. Brother 5 lowered his head and recited scriptures. What if Su kills him? At least he could be liberated early, right? Just like that, a prominent figure in the province has been reduced to this state by a little brat. And in old Murong's heart, his hatred for this little demon is already overwhelming. But under the eaves, one must endure. For now, he didn't have any good solutions. He had planned to first reach the mountain top to note the terrain of Wufeng Mountain. This was for future opportunities to seek revenge. But he suddenly felt an overwhelming pressure approaching. As he reached out to take a look, he realized that this almost visible aura came from Yujizi. At that moment, he was gathering the power of yin and yang. He gazed firmly ahead. His opponent. At this moment, Su Er also rushed towards him with a knife. Clearly, this wasn't their first time discussing martial arts through combat. Seeing Yujizi, compared to their initial encounter, it was a completely different realm. He wasn't overly surprised. In the astonished gaze of the old man Murong, the little devil cheerfully remarked that the old man's Tiandi sword sect seemed to have made progress again. Is this the legendary realm of two instruments returning to origin? It looks quite agile, doesn't it? But to Yujizi, there was no sense of pride in his words. The longer he spent with Su, the more he could sense the vast power sleeping within this young man's body. Even though I am now only a thin line away from the realm of my ancestor, I have no sense that I can defeat this little fellow. But it's about maintaining dignity in defeat. When Yujizi strikes, it is my strongest sword now. It feels almost like I'm cheering myself on. Feeling the fierce aura from the opponent, I suddenly realize I underestimated his progress. With this sword strike, dust and smoke rose everywhere. The once pristine Wufeng Mountain was left with a deep scar by the two of them. However, during this time, it wasn't just Yujizi who made progress. When the dust settled, old Murong was shocked to discover that Su remained completely unscathed under such an assault. The second move of the Nine Heavens sword technique shot forth from his hand with a chilling intensity. He shouted joyfully to him, "Big brother, I'll give it my all too." As he watched the little guy's expected state, Yujizi also prepared himself to face him head-on. But in Murong's eyes, the boy's sword seemed to tear a rift in the sky. Even the trees were shaking. In an instant, their ultimate moves collided. After a while, Yujizi admitted defeat, bringing the discussion to an end. If that sword had been aimed at him, he would likely be nothing but bones by now. But everything now left him extremely satisfied. He indicated that he was about to leave. This wonderful experience had already broadened his horizons. One day, the world would repay them for this. Meanwhile, Murong watched this scene and felt completely deflated. I think it's better if I give up on the idea of revenge. But when Su heard that the other party was leaving, she was first taken aback. And then she smiled. It was as if to say, if you don't leave, I might think you want to become a mountain bandit too. And in Yujizi's heart, being able to witness Su's growth in person, he has already gained a sense of satisfaction from transcending his own limits. Just before summer arrived, he quietly left the mountain village. A month later, a chubby man in purple slowly walked up Wufeng Mountain. While admiring the scenery, he also complained that the beasts here seemed to have no concept of fear. At that moment, a massive black bear was roaring at him. Looking closely, a few small black bears are backing up behind the man. This explains why he is so fearless. It must be their mother. But since she has shown her teeth to him, I, the master of the Yin Wind, will have no mercy. This demon is devoutly wiping the statue of Buddha in the ruins, but he can't control his brute strength. He accidentally made a hole in the statue's belly. There was an ancient book, rich in history, sleeping within him. He picked it up nervously and examined it closely. Little did he know that this would soon change the entire landscape of the martial world. And he would be the one to unify the Green Lemon as the breakthrough demon lord. It turned out that he had been taken in by Shaolin when he was young. But for some reason, he possessed an innate strength. At the temple, he worked even harder than the martial monks. Seeing him lift over a ton of heavy grain with his bare hands, the young monks usually regarded him as a fierce beast. But in the eyes of the simple-hearted young demon lord, all this hard work was just a way to repay the old monk's kindness. He didn't mind their strange looks and felt that they genuinely liked him. However, his connection to the Buddhist sect was weak, so he could only sigh from afar. 15 years ago, he passed by an old warehouse, and suddenly discovered that the ceiling had collapsed. It happened to cover the Buddha statue that had not been moved in time. The young demon lord watched this scene, and didn't think much of it. He simply saw the dilapidated Buddha statue, and felt a bit of pity. It was then that he unexpectedly obtained the Indra Sutra. He became the greatest among the top 10 masters today. He also subdued the 12 major deer forest factions that had been in constant civil war for years. He granted them the title of the 12 Eagles of the Deer Forest. They helped him manage the various bandits and robbers in the martial arts world. However, today outside Wufeng village, an unexpected guest has arrived. Just as this person was about to shout, Tianyang rushed over with a few brothers. Breathless as they looked at the newcomer, he introduced himself there. It turns out that this seemingly insignificant drunkard is actually the Shadow Wind Beast Master of the 12 Shadows of Lulin. He is also the leader of Lulin in this province. For a while, the 7 brothers in the Zhai inside the residence of Juyi stared at the elders on the stage with confusion. They truly did not understand. Previously, he clearly ignored the life and death of this place. So why now is he the dignified ruler of Lulin province? You specifically came to this tiny place, Wufeng village. Everything is unclear. Everyone could only listen to him timidly. And the master of the Yin Wind was not in a hurry. First, he took a few hearty swigs of old wine. Then he asked, aren't there supposed to be 10 brothers? Why are only 7 people here? And there are also 2 such beautiful young ladies. Were you specifically called to serve me, master? But Tianyang seemed much calmer at this moment. Pretending not to hear the latter part of the sentence, he replied, the other 3 brothers have all gone into seclusion. Only by working hard like this can their Wufeng village have the power to protect itself, right? What a statement. The host, who was somewhat intoxicated, was slightly surprised. The young leader was clearly hinting that Lu Lin had never provided them with protection. He waved his hand. Surprisingly, he didn't mind the meaning behind the other person's words. He let him introduce the situation here first. Meanwhile, the 6th brother was still asking the 4th brother if he wanted to call Su-er over. But the 4th brother hushed him. Although the old man's behavior was frivolous and unruly, it hadn't reached the point of tearing their faces. If Su-er comes, and hears about his bad ideas for Jiumei and Shimi, he will definitely go up and give him a good beating. At that time, it would provoke the entire Luling alliance. And I fear the situation in the village will become even more dangerous. For now, we can only wait and see how Big Brother handles this. And when he learned that the 2 young girls were brothers from the village, the Beast Master unexpectedly showed a very cheerful expression. He could hear that both of them, the 2 Lao Ba, were initially enthusiastic. Then, as suddenly as a deflated balloon, they lost all interest. He didn't even bother to play Tai Chi with them anymore. He solemnly told them that the Lu Lingmeng summit would be held in July. Along the way, he had confirmed that the Jade Maiden was indeed here. The matter of their defeat was true. Therefore, their 5 Peaks fort had been recognized. If we can achieve good results at the summit, we will have the opportunity to receive continuous support and blessings from the Deer Lemon. Seeing Tianyang excitedly holding this invitation, this Beast Master still harbors some ulterior motives. He wants to suggest they host a dinner for him. His gaze is greedily scanning Jiumei and Shimei. However, Tianyang, upon hearing this, didn't wait for him to say more. He immediately called for Lao Si to help support this esteemed guest and walked outside. In a hazy state from the alcohol, he suddenly realized that they intended to drag him down to the town for some fun. Their anxious demeanor made Shou Zhu a bit annoyed, but seeing how they handled things well, he didn't mind too much. But little did he know that the explosives in the village were currently fast asleep. If they were to wake up and cause a disturbance, that would be exactly what the two of them feared most. I should spend more time teaching the little guy about the ways of the world. The fat man seated above was enjoying the blessings of a VIP, yet his face showed displeasure. To please him, they even summoned the two top courtesans here. But after a few rounds of drinks, he still looked gloomy. His mind echoed with the image of the two sisters in the village, like a mist. He felt the delicious food on the table instantly lost its appeal. Glancing at the girl currently toasting with him, he felt an even greater sense of disparity. It's not that he wanted anything from the two sisters. He just felt that his status should warrant such beautiful women toasting with him. Speaking of which, ENGSUB is quite the alcoholic. And now, drunk, he slammed his cup down angrily and yelled for girls 9 and 10 to come serve him. But this stumped Tianyang and the fourth brother. How dare they provoke the high-ranking official? But they couldn't just stand by and watch their younger sister walk into the lion's den. Just saying, it's so late. Everyone should be asleep by now. And when the beast master saw the two of them reluctant, his bad temper flared up. But no matter what, they were people I had just acknowledged. So I didn't want to make them look too bad. I strode back towards the mountain stronghold with a reckless gait. Tianyang and Lao Si were truly panicked now. But the bereaved master wouldn't understand. What they feared was something else entirely. By the time I returned to the stronghold on Mount Wufeng, it was already late at night. Sister 9 and Sister 10 were indeed fast asleep, but the noise outside was too loud. It gradually woke the two girls up from their sleep. Nowadays, due to the presence of the great Buddha in the village, everyone clearly had less vigilance as bandits. The two girls were no exception. They ran out with panda eyes. But they saw that it was the president of the Deer Forest League provincial branch acting wild and drunk. He just sensed that some trouble was coming. And as soon as he spotted the two sisters, he started shouting. He insisted that they too come and keep him company. This completely baffled them. Then they also heard the fat man yelling that they too were the most handsome in the neighborhood. Without them keeping him company, this fine wine wouldn't taste good either. But at that moment, a hand suddenly rested on his wrist. Tianyang was all smiles. He said, "There are many more girls in the city than in our village," while begging, hoping the master would keep his voice down. However, these words made the beast master's face darken. He tilted his head slightly, staring at Tianya with anger all over his face. "Are you telling me how to do my job? Since I gave you guys a chance and you didn't take it, ruining my mood, then don't blame me for making you lose face. I'm going to break 2 bones from each of you." Watching the aura emanating from them, Tianyang and Lao Si felt that the situation was irretrievable. This commotion must be the Beastmaster preparing to teach this young a lesson early. But the leader tossed something into the air. The chilling feeling made him, a seasoned veteran, choose to observe the situation first. But behind her were just a few rough-looking men who seemed like nothing special, and 2 stunningly beautiful hostess girls. Just as she was completely bewildered, she questioned who dared to radiate murderous intent towards her. She looked in the direction of the source, and the person she saw was surprisingly the seemingly most vulnerable number 10 girl. This also stunned the fat man, who found the whole situation absurd. But this scared Shimmy into a cold sweat. She couldn't control something like killing intent. After a while, she saw the Beastmaster smile sideways. "I didn't expect that the expert in your village would be a young man. Why are you so afraid of me meeting him? Do you think I can't even handle a young lad?" Hearing this, everyone realized that the person standing behind Shimmy was actually Suer. The boy, clearly just waking up, walked silently towards the Enfeng Beastmaster. But the danger emanating subtly from Suer caused the Beastmaster to tense up. Meanwhile, Tianyang and Lao Si felt a headache coming on. Knowing Suer's temper, they feared he would surely offend the leader. And sure enough, the little guy, still drowsy, asked the fat man, "Are you looking for a beating in our village?" These words instantly enraged the usually superior Beastmaster. Feigning indifference, he turned his head, indicating that he wouldn't stoop to bickering with a child. But he secretly gathered his energy in his palm. Suddenly turning, he lunged at Suer with a claw. At this moment, Tianyang had come to a realization. He only prayed that Suer would go easy on him. facing the chilling wind rushing towards him. Suor finally woke up from his doze. Is his inner strength that special? The young man faced the top expert again, but unexpectedly let out a snort of laughter. He looked at the surging and overwhelmingly powerful Han inner strength rushing towards him, and with a single move, he dispelled it. And this skill, in the past, it's absolutely impossible for him to do it. Even the Wind Beast Master looked completely incredulous. His Wind muscles seem soft, but they conceal ice, let alone dispersing it. If he hadn't used more inner force to form a rigid chi, if it touched any part of his body, his meridians would be invaded by the coldness. In recent years, countless top experts have suffered great losses at his hands. But this young man before him, his face is filled with disdain. This further enraged the Beast Master, who gathered 80% of his inner strength again. Raising a single hand, his recently dispersed inner energy, the rigid, ring-shaped object appeared around the boy's neck again. Such a bizarre scene. Jiao Mei and Shi Mei were extremely anxious. They were simply afraid that Shuai would be in danger because of them. But Tian Yang and Lao Si were even more nervous. They were afraid that if Shuai lost his temper, he might beat his superior to death. However, the Shouju didn't wait for the boy to react. He instantly detonated the steel weapon at his neck. A series of crackling sounds erupted. But the Beastmaster didn't seem to intend to stop there. He knew this little brat couldn't be that simple. His eyes grew increasingly fierce. Once again, chilling aura coiled around him. This time, he wanted to force the boy, who didn't know his place, to kneel and beg for forgiveness. Just as he clenched his fist, the weapon, which should have completely entered the boy's body, emitted a sound like metal colliding at his neck. And in Suor's eyes, the old man's moves were strange, but it seemed more like he was playing around with him. He grabbed the slightly cool weapon with one hand, and grumbled in his mouth, "If he had Yuji's skill, it will indeed give you a terrible headache, but you're too naive." And this scene made the Beastmaster break out in a cold sweat. He stared blankly at the boy, who looked like a monster. He wondered if he was truly drunk. He even saw him calmly patting the dust off his body. At this moment, the boy in his eyes had transformed from surprising to terrifying. Thinking back to the reactions of those few people in the village, I realized the rumors were a huge misconception. It's not accurate to say that the 10 masters of Five Peaks Fort defeated Wudong's top expert. It was this young man who single-handedly shouldered the burden of victory. Those two bastards didn't explain the truth to me beforehand. Now I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. But immediately afterward, the master showed an extremely happy expression. To him, opponents I can have a good fight with are now few and far between. I never expected to have such an opportunity here. But before I could finish my sentence, I heard Suor let out a snort of laughter like a pig. He mocked how the Beast Master's title sounded like a dog king, or rather, an extremely plump old dog. But upon hearing this, the Beast Master didn't get angry anymore. A flash of purple light appeared in his eyes, then vanished. He instantly closed the distance. His inner strength gathered at the tip of his claw. A viper, bearing its fangs and claws, lunged toward Suor. He aimed to tear the boy's left shoulder to shreds with his power. Seeing this, Suor's eyes gradually calmed. He formed his two fingers into a sword, meeting the viper's ferocious claw head-on. A flash of golden light appeared, but it failed to move the little guy in the slightest. The boy hung his head, his expression gloomy. His eyes gradually turned cold. He could feel that the strange old man was going all out against him. If that's the case, then he heard a crisp sound of bones breaking. The Beast Master's two fingers were instantly snapped. He was still dazed. Then he heard the boy's voice again, faintly carried on the wind, "You have killing intent. Then I won't hold back either." Before the words left his mouth, the boy suddenly disappeared from the Beastmaster's sight. When he reappeared, he had already breached his defenses. With a powerful punch, he was about to let the old man feel just how vast the gap between them truly was. But the old man saw that he could not avoid it. He realized, to his horror, that he had encountered a true monster. He could only wait for death. At this moment, Tian Yang's voice suddenly and inopportunely rang out. "Suor, show mercy." The boy's unstoppable momentum frightened the old man, who was originally in a position of authority, beyond measure. Just as the fist, like a heavenly punishment, was about to land on his body, the head of the family anxiously shouted, "Sewer is guarding, while the dragon god devours." The moment this wind master, the tiny fist stopped before the old man's eyes, even with the violent wind raging behind him. That fist had already filled his entire vision. Large beads of sweat poured down like rain. Just now, he clearly felt as if a messenger from a large ship was slowly approaching him. He waved to himself, and revealed his sinister skeletal true form. Not until the boy's fist stopped before him, did the messenger sigh, and leave. With a thud, the formidable wind beast master of the 12 braves of Lulan, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He seemed to have aged several years, although he hadn't yet unleashed his full power. The oppressive feeling the boy gave him was already on par with the alliance leader. This caused the beastmaster, who was always arrogant, to lose any desire to fight back. He timidly looked up at the monstrous boy. The coldness emanating from him once again made him unable to move. Sewer, on the other hand, was looking at this old man who had come to his home and run wild, and he actually wanted to just punch him to death. But Big Brother seems to have some reservations. That's why he glared fiercely at the Beastmaster. "I won't hit you either. You just have to greet the Big Brothers obediently, and then say you have something to do and scram." Tianyan and Lao Si watched Sewer scolding the leader. Although the night wind made it hard to hear the specifics, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. But at this moment, the Beastmaster suddenly stood up and jumped to the side of the gate, as if afraid he wouldn't be able to leave through this exit. He anxiously told Wufeng and the others that he still had very important business to attend to. "Let's meet again in Wannan City." Under everyone's astonished gaze, Yu Bai disappeared without a trace in a flash. The brothers in the village also understood. Su Erziqiang can no longer be viewed with normal understanding. It's just that this time, the little guy didn't really hurt the other party. One can see that he is gradually becoming more reliable on Xingxing. Looking at it this way, Wufeng Village's future should be limitless, right? Then he saw Su Er running towards his two older brothers like a child again, while the fourth brother could only complain that they were thinking a little too far ahead. But what they didn't know was, Suer's recent performance had already made the Beastmaster's heart sway. The young man's vitality was like a dragon playing in water. This unfathomable depth, if he were to participate in the Lulan Grand Assembly, it would likely lead to great chaos. Thinking of this, he must report to the alliance leader for a decision. And several days later, at dusk, he was personally escorting a special treasure with the Chamber of Commerce president. They were giants of the Merchant Alliance, with elite soldiers and generals as their subordinates. It should have been a smooth journey without any mishaps. But at this moment, they were blocked by a man in a black robe. He wielded a ring-shaped blade. If I'd seen this attire years ago, any force in the Central Plains would have fled. But the demon cult has been hidden for too long. Looking at the leader of these guards who drew their swords against him, he could only sigh that the martial world had truly forgotten him. Coming back to his senses, he was already several shades darker. The things his cult leader wanted, no one has ever been able to keep it. At the guild leader's angry roar, the guards immediately swarmed him, but almost no one noticed that the guild leader's forehead was already drenched in sweat. As the cloaked figure reveled in a massacre unseen for years, he and his wife had already vanished. Not far away, two guards were escorting him as he attempted to escape. They asked the chairman if he wanted to request reinforcements, but upon hearing this, he rebuked the guards, telling them not to needlessly increase casualties. All they had to do was to defend against the man's advance with all their might. The object they were escorting was too important. Once this was over, he would surely join his brothers on their journey. But not now. This one, above all, must not fall into the hands of the demon cult. And when the cloaked figure discovered the other party had already escaped, he then understood that the old man must have discovered his identity and slipped away silently. It further confirmed his belief that the object the cult leader sought was surely in the old man's possession. Thinking of this, he pulled off his mask. "Since you are all discarded pawns, then I should have no problem with how you want to die. And that old man would never escape his grasp." The boy was originally a discarded child of a noble family, but in the den of bandits in the mountain stronghold, he felt for the first time how much change fine clothes and a jade belt could bring him. It turned out that the route from Wufeng Mountain to Wan'an City passed through the heartland of the Righteous Alliance, and the #1 family in the world, the Nangong Sword Saint, also resided there. That old geezer Murong, who's always been bad news for the village, finally came up with a sensible suggestion. He said that Wufeng's reputation is now enormous. If the Righteous Alliance recognizes their bandit identities, even though Seventh Brother's strength is almost invincible, it's still a case of 2 fists against 4 hands. If others are ambushed, even if Gaze could somehow rescue them, it would still be too little, too late. So he finally dug out his life savings from Tianyang's pocket. He dressed everyone in the group in extremely formal attire, and the 2 village beauties looked even more eye-catching than wealthy young ladies at this moment. This made Lao Ba, the rough man who already admired Jiao Mei, even more flustered. And the older brothers also showered praises on the 2 girls. But before the brothers could boast for a bit, a young boy's timid voice came from behind them. "I've never worn such complicated clothes before. Brothers, can you check if I'm wearing them correctly?" And Suer, who was originally from a noble family, his handsomeness now is in no way inferior to that of his biological father back then. Looking at Jior, who has become a love-struck young girl, Lao Ba felt a pang of heartache. Thankfully, Suer is still young. Otherwise he would have been eaten alive by jealousy. Before the execution, Old Man Murong repeatedly warned them never to let anyone know that they were from Wufeng village. If the Merchant League finds out that 9 out of 10 village leaders are gone, and he wouldn't be able to return to the village for several months, I'm afraid the main camp is in danger. So Tianyang decided to bypass the towns near Wufeng Mountain. He walked the 100 miles of mountain roads in his new clothes. Thus, 2 nights later, he escaped into the deep mountains with the Chamber of Commerce president, his daughter, and several guards. He was targeted by the demon cult's great Dharma protector. This incident made the first president of the Merchant Alliance feel like he had a thorn in his back at all times. But the girl didn't understand what that meant. She didn't even understand why hundreds of guards were present. Why her father made such a hasty decision to abandon the city and preserve the army. At this moment, the leading guards suddenly reported that they had discovered a group of people ahead. This made the guild leader Chu Yunhan even more nervous. The 8 zhongs in his hands absolutely had to be delivered to the Righteous Alliance. The demon cult was making a comeback. If he couldn't inform them in time, he feared that the tragedy of 20 years ago might repeat itself. So he immediately put everyone on alert, preparing to strike first, only to find that when they burst out of the treetops and into the sight of the Chamber of Commerce's people, a group of people were sitting around a campfire, roasting wild game. Moreover, they were dressed in fine clothes, not the black robes of the demon cult. One of them, a red-haired boy, wiped his mouth. He gloomily looked at the group of people charging towards him like fertilized beasts. He asked them what they meant, his voice laced with displeasure. However, Chu Yunhan's mind was racing. He understood that it was only a matter of time before they were caught up by the Grand Protector. If these people were from the Righteous Alliance, it would seem like a blessing from heaven. So he immediately chose to step forward and negotiate. He wanted to find out which sect or school they belonged to. But Tianyang had already planned ahead. If he encountered outsiders, he would say he came from the Feilong School of Hebei. He had even fabricated a bunch of information about the school in his mind. But Chu Yunhan didn't ask much. He simply stated his identity and hoped to travel with righteous people. This sudden, pleading proposal from the other party was the first thing that the old hand, Murong, reacted to. He saw right through their eagerness and desperation. If he rashly accepted their proposal, he might well invite unnecessary disaster. If they didn't choose to be honest, then they had nothing more to discuss. At that moment, Chu Yunhan realized that he had indeed been too hasty, but the Grand Protector's reputation was too formidable. He has no other choice now. Besides, he comes from a martial arts background. He can now roughly distinguish that almost all of these people possess exceptionally remarkable auras, especially the red-haired boy. This pure feeling, it's not inferior to even the top experts he's encountered before. Plus, he doesn't have time to hesitate now. Having no other choice, he took out a money pouch worth tens of thousands of times more than Tianyang's life savings. With a clang, A heap of gold coins spilled onto the ground. And with it, the president of the First Merchants League knelt down. He couldn't reveal the truth, but he truly begged the young heroes to help him. This old man was originally the lord of the Merchants League. Yet he groveled before the bandits, offering a hefty sum for temporary protection. However, they flatly refused him. Later, the first to question it was ironically the one who had been most initially wary and insulting. In his view, faced with so much gold, even if it brought some trouble, it's not something I can't accept. But Tianyang only sighed softly. The other party's identity and actions were too suspicious. A major problem encountered by those in power. For their group, it might be more than they can handle. The more exaggerated that bag of gold coins was, the greater the danger he thought they would face. So, when you're out and about, it's still safer to be cautious. Everyone heard it clearly. Jiumei felt even more like her mind wasn't working properly. She called out to Suer, asking if he had thought of all this. But she was interrupted by her fourth brother. He said that big brother meant they should leave early now. That old man seemed so nervous just now. If we stay, we'll likely be considered part of their group. And for Suer, he won't understand big brother's words for a while. You two can ponder it along the way. Having said that, Murong didn't regret missing out on this wealth. The leader prioritizing everyone's safety is understandable. So everyone started packing their bags. I plan to take a walk tonight. However, Lao Ba actually only half understood. But now, his heart is filled with spring. His mind and eyes were practically glued to Jiumei. Seeing her large luggage, his old face flushed red. He fantasized about himself handsomely picking up her luggage for her. He imagined Jiumei shyly calling him Longshan Gu. The big fool thought more and more that this was a good opportunity. He was delighted and about to touch Jiumei, but his face suddenly changed drastically. Right above his head, a man in black suddenly drew his sword and lunged at him. But when he sensed something amiss, the other party was already close, and the first one to react was still Rongshan. He erupted with unprecedented power like a madman, charging towards Jiumei. At the critical moment, she grabbed his arm and flung him backward. But this caused her own body to be directly hit by his attack. The spray of bright red before her eyes instantly jolted Jiumei. But suddenly, only then did everyone see that Lao Ba had been ambushed. Ku Rongshan's wound was too deep, and the attacker intended to kill him from the start, to the point where everyone almost lost consciousness on the spot. Blood flowed uncontrollably. But all this was child's play in the eyes of the men in black. They weren't going to let a single living person leave here today, whether they died first or last. What was there to fight over? But just as he thought this, all he could see in his eyes was a foot, infinitely enlarging. Schwer kicked him in the face, causing his blood to surge through his body, like an explosion of gunpowder. In the blink of an eye, a loud bang erupted in the distance. But it all happened so fast. Only then did Jiumei come to her senses. Seeing Lao Ba, who was nearly unconscious, she anxiously called out, Rongshan Gu, you can't be in trouble. But before the big oaf lost consciousness at that moment, his last words were different from what he expected. When Tianyang saw the shocking wound on Lao Ba's body, he immediately sensed something was wrong. He immediately shouldered Lao Ba and asked Lao Yotiao Murong, do you know where the nearest town is? After receiving the answer, he immediately headed down the mountain. Just as the fourth brother picked up his luggage and was about to call Suer to leave immediately, he was shocked to find that Schwer was already facing off against numerous people in black on the trees behind them, who possessed the highest martial arts skill among them besides the young boy. Was even more startled at this scene. He knew very well that Rongshan, having learned martial arts from the little monster, was already very strong. Even if he launched a surprise attack, he wouldn't be able to injure him to this extent. Therefore, this could only mean that every single one of these people in black possessed superior martial arts skills to his own. But this thought was even more solidified after Suer made his move. He sighed softly and told his older brothers, he can handle the people here alone. Saving Lao Ba is the priority. He won't let a single one of these bastards go. Seeing the little guy's resolute words, and that these people didn't seem to have any intention of letting them go, Tianyang could only grit his teeth, and once again rely on Suer's fighting ability. Everyone, carrying Rongshan, quickly rushed down the mountain. Seeing these people fleeing, the men in black didn't pursue them. Instead, they decided to deal with this little imp blocking their way first. They saw the other party slash down with a sword. Suor dodged sideways. Seeing his movements so elegant, they looked up. But then, an icy, chilling question reached my ears. Who are you, exactly? Not going to answer? Then die. Suor landed another punch on the other man's face, then instantly appeared before the other two men in black, landing a blow to one's abdomen, and kicking the other away. Before the other person could react, a palm landed on his head. Seeing this, the remaining men in black realized that this young imp was no ordinary person. Therefore, they didn't immediately attack. But Suor was exceptionally agitated. Old 8 was, after all, his sworn brother. For this group of people to attack on sight, he certainly didn't intend to let them off easily. Plus, he had already seen through their skills. Just a bunch of trash. No matter how many come, they're all useless. They are the new, promising citizens, and also mountain bandits, heading to Wannan City to participate in the Lulan conference, but got caught up in the demon cult's resurgence, a plot that has been brewing for 20 years. Meanwhile, Rongshan, a rough and simple man, was about to confess his feelings to the girl he admired. But in a blink of an eye, he nearly lost his life. This sudden attack also made Tianyang secretly groan in his heart. He had no choice but to make Suor fend off the strong enemy again. He himself, with a simple blood-stopping garment, hurried towards the town at the foot of the mountain, only to find he hadn't walked far. Murong, however, suddenly felt something was amiss. The blood in the air was familiar to this old hand. Although he was used to playing second fiddle, he immediately signaled to block the fire's advance. He himself stealthily climbed up into the treetops to investigate the source of the blood. He knew the casualties hadn't been gone long. If those men in black had accomplices, I fear those involved in the incident ahead are them. And the Yanyu Trading Company has been nearly wiped out. Even Chu Yunhan, though from the Wu Gate, is now exhausted from battle. But the demon cult's group of men in black have completely controlled them. They even lured the leader of the Wounded Alliance into handing over 8 Zhong-grade herbs, like a cat toying with a mouse. Then you may let him and his daughter go. Otherwise, I'm afraid this little girl will lose her head. Faced with this desperate situation, Chu Yunhan became much clearer-headed. To the whole martial world, Ba Zhuzhong is a beacon of hope, and even if he hands himself over, they couldn't possibly allow themselves to leave either. Even though it was pointless, they could only hold the stalemate for now. But this current situation wasn't what the other party hoped to see. They chased them all the way here. If Ba Zhuzhong failed to retrieve it and return for his mission, the sect master wouldn't let him off easily. Just thinking of the dreadful 3-corpse brain god pill, the Grand Protector shivered involuntarily. His eyes gradually darkened, but he was suddenly startled into a cold sweat by a dark figure behind him. The newcomer was 9 feet tall, with a face like a ripe jujube. His physique rivaled that of Commander Kuei, one of the 9 martial arts grandmasters in the play, and the aura he emanated was extremely strange. A strong man, yet seemingly possessed by demonic magic. Seeing this scene, Murong's heart skipped a beat. Although the strength of each of those was greater than his own, but the man who appeared there now was probably even more formidable than the Imperial Princess Jinren he had encountered before. What kind of organization was it that could tame people with such strength in such an orderly manner? Fourth brother softly asked from the side. It also threw Murong into a panic. If that man discovered them, he could probably wipe them out in an instant. With no other choice, he could only signal the 4th leader to secretly peek with him and watch what unfolded. Meanwhile, the Chamber of Commerce guards no longer chose to sit idly by. With a surge of anger, they struck and seriously wounded 2 magic cult members, protecting their guild master. It's about saving the young lady. Although their momentum is strong, they haven't yet reached the opponent's front. Then they heard General Kuei's cold snort. He drew out a very strange gunpowder barrel from behind him. He casually threw it out. It exploded in midair, scattering purple-black debris that fell to the ground. Even more magically, it transformed into patches of dark purple pool water. Just one glance, and these guards were as if they had stepped into the void, swallowed by the pool, and the water seemed to have endless power. climbing onto their bodies and faces. They couldn't even cry out for help. Before being dragged down, only the ebony pool, like the maw of an abyss, remained. Witnessing this scene, fourth brother and Murong were almost disbelieving, as if they had seen a monster. However, Murong's perspective was the broadest. This bizarre event was even more shocking to him. The Fu Lu inscription on the nine-toothed giant's hand, at the moment the gunpowder was activated, seemed to have infused the captive's power into his unique inner strength. But how did he then manage to devour the living person himself? Then it would be unknown. Meanwhile, Su Er's side, under the siege of the men in black, was no longer as easy as before. Each of them is probably powerful enough to defeat 10 old man Murongs. Even though he was fully focused, he still couldn't achieve a decisive victory. Meanwhile, the devil cult members were secretly groaning in agony. This kid's fighting power was just too outrageous. Before he even made a single move, their special attack squad was almost completely wiped out. As a result, they didn't dare to make another move for a while. But this gave Su'er a golden opportunity. After gathering his strength, he charged towards the group of men in black. The Nine Heavens sword technique manifested once again. But by the time the cultists reacted, it was too late.